Good morning, everybody. It is a real pleasure to welcome you to the Cyprus High Commission to the UK. This is the second time we are collaborating with Cyprus Forum in its London series, and we are very happy they chose to work with us in their effort to establish an annual series of productive, thought-provoking conversation in interesting and often difficult topics. Why we do it? We believe in debate, and we want to foster debate. We also like to win the argument, but that is not for now. Before I call Nikolas Kyriakidis, Executive President of the Cyprus Forum, to the podium to open our event, I want to invite you to also enjoy the art in these rooms, a collection called Relocations by Cypriot artist Zinon Tsepras. Without further ado, I call Nikolas to the podium and leave you to enjoy the art and, of course, the conversation, which I hope will make your visit to our home, the Cyprus House, an enjoyable one.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, members of the Cypriot diaspora, friends of Cyprus, welcome to the second edition of the Cyprus Forum London. It is truly a privilege to stand before you today as we gather policymakers, academics, thinkers, and business people from the UK, Cyprus, and the rest of the international community for a renewed dialogue on geopolitics and important bilateral relations, from a relationship that is as historic as it is forward-looking, the relationship between Cyprus and the United Kingdom, and also the now renewed strategic partnership between the UK and the EU. I wish to briefly focus on Cyprus and the UK, as we share a rich and complex history rooted in deep cultural, educational, economic, and political ties. From the legal frameworks we share to the thousands of Cypriots who have made the UK their home, this is a relationship that has evolved with time, weathered storms, and continues to grow. Just yesterday, in a moment of significant political symbolism, another meeting between President Christodoulidis and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the third in less than a year. This high-level engagement signals a renewed commitment to collaboration, to shared strategic interests, and to an open channel of communication between our two nations, particularly in a period marked by shifting global dynamics and regional challenges. Sorry, I'm a bit out of breath because I was running. In parallel, we are seeing a positive turn in EU-UK relations, with cooperation beginning to normalize and strengthen after a period of relative uncertainty. Cyprus warmly welcomes this as an active and constructive EU member state and look forward to seeing the relationship reach its potential. Additional to Cyprus' EU membership, our country is an Eastern Mediterranean partner and a facilitator of wider regional and international dialogue, an important quality in light also of the upcoming Cyprus presidency in January. The United Kingdom continues to play a vital role in the resolution of the Cyprus problem. As a guarantor power, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and as a country with enduring diplomatic, military, and historical ties to the island, the UK's involvement remains crucial. London is not only a city where Cypriot voices are heard, it's a city where decisions that affect Cyprus are made. This is why holding events such as this one, the Cyprus Forum London, is not just timely, it is essential in our view. Our goal is to help inform those decisions. The role of think tanks, diplomats, and other personalities that participate in the Cyprus Forum event in London can meaningfully contribute to the way we approach the various topics on our agenda. In a world of noise and division, we want to offer a space of deliberation for evidence-based dialogue and for engagement across the political spectrum. Here, different voices are heard, ideas are tested, and new partnerships can be forged. Equally vital is the role of the Cypriot diaspora in the UK. You're not only the lifelong ambassadors of Cyprus abroad, you're change makers, educators, entrepreneurs, public servants, and community leaders. You bring together the best of both worlds. Your participation today is not symbolic, it is also substantive. You carry the lived experience of this bilateral relationship in your work and in your lives. Let this forum be more than a conversation. Let it be a driver for thoughtful cross-pollination, for policy cooperation, for cultural understanding, for supporting peace, stability, and prosperity, not only for Cyprus and the UK, but for our wider neighborhood. Thank you for being here, and thank you for believing in the power of dialogue. First, I have the honor of inviting to the stage Ms. Ειρήνη Πική, Deputy Minister to the President, to deliver the first keynote address on behalf of the Republic of Cyprus. Mrs. Piki.
A bit shorter than Nicholas, I think so. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here with you today at this edition of the Cyprus Forum. It's my first time I participate in a Cyprus Forum event outside Cyprus. I've been to the ones in Cyprus. And I want to congratulate you because there is the Cyprus Forum. It's an excellent forum for exchange of ideas, as Nicholas said. And I'm very happy that it's opening its wings outside Cyprus. This is a forum exactly that has grown into a meaningful platform for constructive dialogue in our homeland, and one that brings together decision makers, academics, innovators, and of course, it's a great platform to explore challenges and solutions that transcend borders. Its presence here in London reflects a natural next steps in a city known globally for its openness, its intellectual exchange, and commitment to democratic values. We meet at a time which is important changes happening in my country. The message I bring today is that Cyprus is evolving, not only through the digitalization of services or structural reforms that are taking place in the island, but through a broader transformation that positions our country as a modern, responsive, and outward-looking European state. Since assuming office in March 2023, our government has made it priority to restore trust in our institutions, to enhance transparency, and improve the effectiveness of public administration. These efforts are driven by our government's stance that good governance underpins everything else: economic growth, investor confidence, and international partnerships. To support this vision, we have established a new governance model in Cyprus. We have established a secretariat for the coordination and support of the government program at the presidency, and it's a department I'm very happy and honored to be leading. The secretariat ensures that there is horizontal cooperation across all ministries and other agencies and helps accelerate delivery through earlier identification of bottlenecks and structured follow-up. So we're not just making decisions, we're making sure that we're implementing our decisions as well. We have also established an annual national program, which is it's broadcasted live by the President of the Republic. So it's direct accountability to the people, as well as an accountability framework once a year. Yet governance is only one part of our story. Cyprus is also transforming economically. In 2024, we recorded a GDP growth of 3.4%, amongst the highest in the euro area. And the spring forecast that the EU announced a couple of days ago, they forecast Cyprus to reach 3% in 2025, compared to only 0.9% for the rest as an average for Europe. So we are at a stage where our economy is doing extremely well. We have unemployment below 5%, inflation around 2%, and we're on the track to reduce public debt under 60% even in 2025. All major credit rating agencies have given Cyprus a rank of A category after 13 years, affirming the credibility of our fiscal and economic strategy. More importantly, we are transitioning from a service economy to a knowledge-based and innovation-driven economy. Our tech sector has tripled over the last decade and now accounts to 14% of our GDP. Cyprus is home to the fastest growing startup ecosystem in the EU for the second year now in a row. With targeted incentives for green investment, for digital transformation, and sustainable growth, we're redefining our economic model, aligning with global priorities and emerging sectors. We're also investing in people. The President was here yesterday, not only to meet with the Prime Minister, but also to launch a very important initiative for us called Minds in Cyprus. It's a campaign designed to reconnect with the Cypriot professionals living abroad, particularly those with experience in innovation, emerging technologies. I'm very happy because we had an audience of over 800 people here in London, and we had over 2,000 people watching the live broadcast. So had engaged with 3,000 people that they're interested to see what their country has to offer. It doesn't mean that everybody will come back. We don't want everybody to come back. We're very happy that we have a number of ambassadors, not real ambassadors like Mr. Kouros, but ambassadors around the world. But it's important for people abroad to know what are the new opportunities that they have to come back to our country. This initiative, Minds in Cyprus, sends a broader message that Cyprus is now a pillar of stability and a hub for talent. As we continue on this path, we remain committed to full alignment with international norms. And let me give an example. Our sanctions enforcement framework. Working closely with the US, the EU, and other partners, we have taken decisive actions against sanctions evasion, freezing suspicious assets, deregistering shell companies, and we're promoting the establishment of 2 new institutions, a national sanctions enforcement unit with technical support, great support from the UK government, as well as a single supervisory authority for corporate service providers. These actions reflect our political will and our role as a credible EU jurisdiction. Cyprus is also stepping up as a partner on the regional and global stage. We actively promote dialogue, regional cooperation, and most importantly, stability, using a strategic geographic position to contribute to regional prosperity. Our recent election to the United Nations Human Rights Council, the first in our history, is a testament to our evolving international role. Also, in this respect, on the economic front, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor is a project of strategic importance for our country and our region as a whole. As a forthcoming holder of the presidency of the Council of the European Union in just a few months, in January 2026, the second time for our country, Cyprus is actively preparing to contribute meaningfully to the Union's strategic agenda. Our priorities will reflect our commitment to a more competitive, cohesive, and outward-facing Europe, one that delivers tangible results for its citizens and reinforces its role on the global stage. Our bilateral relations with the United Kingdom hold a special place in this broader strategy. The meeting held yesterday, Nicolas already mentioned it, the third since the Prime Minister took office, but also the visit of the Prime Minister to Cyprus in December 2024, the first by British Premier in over 5 decades, underscores the depth and renewed momentum of our partnership. UK and Cyprus share long-standing historical ties, but also a forward-looking agenda, one that includes good governance, education, innovation, and regional security. Through the setting up of a strategic dialogue, we aim to strengthen this partnership with tangible outcomes for both our countries and our citizens. We see the UK not only as a close partner, but as a key ally in shaping responses to shared challenges and advancing new forms of cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, This year marks 65 years since the founding of the Republic of Cyprus. As we reflect on that journey, our focus remains firmly on the future. We are modernizing our state with purpose. We are growing our economy with resilience, and we are positioning Cyprus as a credible, confident contributor to regional and global efforts. We're not only asking for trust, we are earning it through reform, responsibility, and results. In closing, I would like to congratulate the organizers of the Cyprus Forum for creating this setting to exchange ideas, build relationships, and contribute to a shared vision of progress. These conversations matter, not only for Cyprus, but for the broader European and international community we are proud to be part of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Piki, for those insightful and forward-looking remarks. Now please join me in welcoming Mrs. Victoria Billing, Director for Europe at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, for our second keynote address. Mrs. Billing.
Same problem. You stand. Madam Deputy Minister, Excellencies, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, Kalimera. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today. I'm delighted that the Cyprus Forum is back in London for a second year, which I think reflects not only the strength of the Cypriot diaspora in the UK, but also the real maturity and depth in our UK and Cyprus partnership. And I know this is a really important week for Cyprus in the UK, with the visit of your president, which people have mentioned, and the real strengthening and links between our two countries, and the very exciting event that you had at the Guildhall last night with the Cypriot community in the UK. So the UK-Cyprus partnership is built with strong foundations on shared values, mutual respect, and historical ties. And the links between our two countries are deep. It's not just the 1.2 million British visitors who enjoy Cypriot hospitality each year, or the 300,000 strong Cypriot community in the UK, but it's our educational, legal, maritime ties that underpin a £3.7 billion trading relationship. Our two governments signed a memorandum of understanding in 2022 to drive forward the bilateral relationship, and I'm pleased that are reflecting the remarks of Madam Deputy Minister and really talking about that ambition for the future. I was very honoured to be there at that time, and it has been such a privilege to see over the last nearly 3 years how we have really taken that ambition and looked for new areas of cooperation. We have a shared ambition to make sure that we're not resting on historical ties, but really building that partnership of the future. And I was in Nicosia earlier this month to review the progress that we have made this year. And not only was it fantastic to be back in Cyprus, as always, on a personal level, but also to see how much progress we have made in strengthening our cooperation from foreign policy, regional policy, legal, justice affairs, and things that benefit our citizens. But I wasn't just there to celebrate our success. I was there to make sure that we were honouring that commitment, that ambition of creating new areas of cooperation. We need to keep challenging ourselves to make sure that we are not only implementing the commitments we've made to deliver practical benefits for our citizens and our economies, but also that we are continuing to adapt for the future. And as part of looking to the future, I do want to say that the UK remains steadfast in our support for a just and lasting settlement in Cyprus, in line with the relevant UN resolutions. And this remains a priority for the UK, and we will continue to support the efforts of the UN Secretary-General's personal envoy to advance the settlement process. Just turning now to the wider challenges, because we're living through a period of profound change, from the Middle East to Ukraine, from migration flows, energy security, maritime security. We are all facing a fragmenting world order, rising geopolitical tensions, and complex threats that transcend borders. And I know that the first session is going to look at that in more detail. The UK and Cyprus have a shared commitment to stability, resilience, international law. As like-minded partners, it's in both our interests, therefore, to work even more closely together to try and address these challenges that are facing our region and the wider world. And we've seen how our partnership can really deliver tangible results for the world, whether this through our joint support for Ukraine, which is ongoing, or our cooperation on the Al-Mathia plan, where the UK aid was delivered through Cyprus to try and reach those in need in Gaza. And significantly, we're also seeing greater alignment within our own shared region of Europe. On Monday, here in London, the UK and EU launched a landmark set of agreements for a new strategic partnership between the UK and the EU. The package from that summit marks a new era in the UK's relations with the EU, on economy, on safety of our citizens, and on security and defence. Focus will now turn on the implementation of those agreements and commitments over the coming months, and it's really positive for us that such a close friend as Cyprus is going to be taking on the presidency of the EU in the first half of next year. And that will be really important for us as we advance our EU and UK agenda. And I look forward to hearing the results of your third session, which is going to look at the evolving and positive relationship between the EU and the UK. The Cyprus Forum itself is a vital part of how we think about how we can work together more effectively. It's not just a platform discussion, it's a catalyst for action. And we're really welcome to have the challenge from policymakers, from academics, from others from the region to really look at how we might challenge our assumptions, raise our ambition, and shape solutions. And so we're really proud to be here and to be able to support the initiative like the Cyprus Forum, and it reflects our strong belief in inclusive, forward-looking policy-making and diplomacy. So I really look forward to hearing the results of the discussions today. I know you've got some very topical items on the agenda, all of which I think we have covered. I wish you a productive and inspiring forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Billing, for your thoughtful contributions and of course, for reaffirming the importance of the UK-Cyprus cooperation. We now move to our first panel, which has title Regional Visions from Europe to Asia in a Fragmented World Order. The discussion will explore how nations and regions are positioning themselves amid global uncertainty. And our distinguished panelists are, of course, the High Commissioner of Cyprus, Mr. Kyriakos Kouros, Sherif Kamel, Ambassador of Egypt to the United Kingdom, Uran Ferizi, Ambassador of Albania to the United Kingdom and Ireland, Emelak Chali, Senior Lecturer at King's College London, and Violette Kairala, former Minister of Economic Empowerment of Women and Youth of Lebanon. The panel will be moderated by George Hajibavli, Program Coordinator at the Eastern Mediterranean Program at Oxford. Please take your seats.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Εσύ. Θα κάτσω στην πλευρά να το πάρω.
Νομίζω οι θέσεις είναι λιγότερες.
Working? Perfect. So, hi everyone, my name is George. I am the program coordinator of the East Mediterranean program at the University of Oxford, so you'll see I'll try to take the direction that way, so please forgive me. But I wanted to start by saying that I actually had the privilege of attending the 20th anniversary of the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies last Friday and Saturday. And one of the key themes that came up was that global processes, global dependence is increasingly becoming more important. However, it's still all rooted in a local, regional context. So that means that we are delighted to have such a broad panel, capable of exploring in a nuanced fashion different regions of the world. Unfortunately, the High Commission of India cannot be here with us today, but nonetheless, we have Europe, we have different actors and individuals from the East Mediterranean, and that will enable us to better understand how the local fits into the local, starting with an emphasis on the East Mediterranean, because I really wanted to build upon, with the speaker's permission, on a discussion that we held at the Cyprus Forum in Nicosia last October, which basically, it was a very Euro-Atlantic panel. So it was the US Ambassador, British High Commission to Cyprus, Managing Director of the European External Action Service, and the Greek Prime Minister's Energy Advisor. So that explicated once again what has become codified into a piece of US legislation, which basically says that energy in the East Mediterranean is critical for European security because it enables, it's necessary to enable the region to diversify away from Russian energy. And we all see now what's happening in Ukraine. After the war in Ukraine, you basically have the European Union subsidizing the Russian wartime economy. So they've given more money to Russia through energy purchases than they've given to Ukraine through financial and wartime assistance, despite claims that we will do whatever it takes. But it's more than energy, and I'm happy that some of the speakers will address the component of beyond energy, but also that of energy. And without further ado, I would like to introduce this brilliant speakers that we have here with us, starting with the host of this session today, His Excellency, the High Commissioner of Cyprus, Dr. Kyriakos Kouros. We have Ambassador Sharif Kamel of Egypt, sitting over there. Ms. Violet Kairala, who is a minister in Lebanon and other East Mediterranean states. We have the Ambassador of Albania, Mr. Uran Ferizi. We happen to be members of the same college in Oxford as well as Nicholas. So the conspiracy theories amongst you might say, this is the first step for a university college's global domination. I can neither confirm or deny that. But last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Akshali, who is a senior lecturer with defense studies at King's College, right? Perfect. Should we start with the host then? Would you like to exercise host privileges in making your introductory remarks? Please, let's try to stick it within 8 to 9 minutes, if that's possible, to make sure that Nicholas doesn't give me berates me afterwards.
Thank you, George. Welcome everybody here. We are very happy that we are co-hosting with the Cyprus Forum. I'm very glad that Kyriakidis is the driving force behind that. I'm very happy that I see many familiar faces here in the audience, which I tried hard to convince, and maybe not that hard to convince them to be here. I'm very glad that I have to my right hand the Arab world, because part of my heart has been devoted to that part of the world due to my duties, either as ambassador to Lebanon, or, believe it or not, I was envoy to the so-called Arab Spring at some point of my life. And Ural from the Balkans is the other part that surrounds Cyprus, and we are very proud of the relationships with Albania, and we look forward for a fruitful relationship in the future to come, and hopefully with them in the European Union. The issue today is the fragmented world and what's the role of Cyprus in what we are trying to do. Cyprus is 65 years old. I mean, sometimes I wonder, it's almost my age, my country. We went through different decades, reaching this stage where now we are more active instead of being a passive element in a very challenging neighborhood on a global scale. Crises were repeated in the Middle East, and we were feeling or receiving the consequences of that. And what we are engaged the last decade or more is to try and see the glass not half empty. So the approach is, what can we do to achieve growth, prosperity, irrespective of the challenges that we are facing? And the answer is that by building bridges, by partnerships, by approaching the neighbors without criticizing them, but trying to talk with them, engage with them, and figure out what is the best for our mutual interest to move on further. Is this enough for my introduction?
If you'd like them to be, yes.
Yes, because I want to hear more from the other people present. Thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Should we go to the Ambassador, maybe, Your Excellency?
Thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure to be part of the Cyprus Forum. Thank you for inviting me. I don't think it took a lot of convincing to be part of the session today. I think it's also, for all countries within the East Mediterranean, we feel that we are at an advantage, because when you think about the world, you don't find any other geographical spot where you really have three continents connecting. Obviously, we have a very long history in terms of the peoples of that region. We sit also at the crossroads, not only of these three continents, but effectively we are also a connection and a connectivity between East and West, with the Suez Canal, of course, bringing vessels from the Red Sea into the Mediterranean. The cross-culture that we have, our contribution, all people in this region throughout history. Today, we all share also the same challenges and the priorities, and it's always our priority, and definitely at this time, about prosperity, about building our countries. We are at different levels. Some of us are facing even more challenges, but I fully agree with the High Commissioner of Cyprus. By working together, you are in a much better place when you are able to work with your neighbors. You have a lot to share with your neighbors. You have a lot of interests. You can multiply your interests by having your next door neighbor or by even the wider neighborhood working together. And obviously, it is a very difficult neighborhood, and I'm sure we'll come back to this later on. But I think we are also proud that over the last 10 years, we have been building these bridges. Stands out through all the activities we've been doing, the trilateral cooperation that does exist and is very active between Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece, which also has repetition with other countries in the region. Obviously, other countries also, Egypt with other countries in the region, Arab countries, we have been working for a very long time, but we are also focusing on this. 5 or 6 years back, we had the initiative also of establishing the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, which was a very important platform for coordination, for policy exchange, for cooperation between the countries, since we have started to discover our resources, our natural gas resources. This has been quite helpful in understanding what different countries aim to do, and also how we can work closer together. And I think February of this year, we have signed agreements between Egypt and Cyprus, a significant milestone in terms of our cooperation, allowing natural gas to be exported from Cyprus to Egypt, which then after the processing at our facilities will be re-exported to Europe. So to your point, I think this region also does play an important role in terms of the economic security of Europe, but not only at this point. Now, the challenge we are facing is both within the region, but also globally, because obviously the region and Egypt is at the center of many of the conflicts that are going on, and I'm sure I will not be able to touch on all of them, but obviously the Gaza war stands out in terms of its implications to all of us, not only in the region, but beyond, definitely. And we have been working on this conflict for quite some time, not only through the last 18 or 19 months, but even before that. And this has its implications for the region's security, for the East Mediterranean, but also for the global security in many ways. We are also seeing levels of migration, numbers of migration that comes from Africa, again through that region, into Europe. And this is an important challenge, and a challenge that is very much felt in Europe and in the United Kingdom, but it's also a challenge that we can work upon, again, through cooperation. Egypt is proud that since 2016, not one ship carrying illegal immigrants left our shores towards Europe. But we need to do more, obviously, and there are other parts of the region where we have also to cooperate with the countries to make sure that everybody can have the same experience. one of the implications of the Gaza war is what we're seeing in terms of maritime security, which you've mentioned also. The Houthis' attacks on the shipping lines in the Red Sea had a great effect on maritime security, on trade flows, on supply chains. And it had also a very direct impact on Egypt because we have lost 8 to 9 billion US dollars since November 2023 when these attacks started because of shipping lines choosing a longer route but relatively safer route, obviously, with these attacks going on. Now, we are dealing with all these challenges also within a global context that has become very challenging over the last 3 years. The polarization that we have seen on the global stage had its effects on our region as well. Different international players were instrumental in terms of trying to deal with some of the conflicts in our region, but because of the war in Europe and the polarization that we have felt, this meant that the region also suffered. Now, again, it has its impact on Europe and on the international security in many ways. Nevertheless, I think the region, and we have seen and heard about the figures of growth, Egypt also is expected to grow at 4% this year, which I think is quite remarkable given the situation we're dealing with. We have many areas of cooperation. We haven't mentioned tourism, which is a very important sector. I think it was mentioned that 1.2 British tourists went to Cyprus last year. But the whole region, including, of course, Lebanon, including other countries, and definitely my own country, tourism, not only for one country, but also programs where we see tourists coming to different countries together is an important area of work. So we have a stake also as a region in terms of the global context and in terms of how we can deal with some of the global challenges and wars going on and make sure that this is not something that would come easily to other parts of the world in the next few years. And I'll stop there for now for the introduction.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those exceptional remarks. I'll reflect on your points in my later question. You've given me plenty of food for thought. Shall we go to Ms. Karala next for her introductory remarks?
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the invitation, Your Excellency, and thank you to the Cyprus Forum. Both Excellencies spoke about the opportunities and the importance of cooperating. I'm going to go to the what happens if we don't, okay? And I'm going to focus on the country I come from and the countries around. We are witnessing a rapidly shifting global and regional order. The United States' influence is becoming more focused on core strategic interest, while, of course, encouraging regional players to take more responsibility. China is asserting itself diplomatically and economically as a counterweight to the US. Meanwhile, Europe, still dealing with energy insecurity, the war in Ukraine, and rising political polarization, is being pushed to rethink its global role and strategic autonomy. In recent months, there's been a breath of fresh air, a bit of optimism, cautious optimism in the Eastern Mediterranean. Particularly, I'm going to focus on Lebanon and Syria. For many in Europe, this region is viewed through two lenses. Either we think of energy, or we think of humanitarian crisis. The Eastern Mediterranean holds significant gas reserves, which could reduce dependence of Russian energies. Others focus on the human cost of war and displacements. However, stability in the region, especially in Lebanon and Syria, is not just energy. It's not just humanitarian aid. It's a strategic priority for ensuring a stable Eastern Mediterranean for several interconnected reasons, spanning from regional security and energy cooperation to migration and weaponization of migration, with direct consequences on Europe's security, resilience, and the integrity of its democratic values. The security situation in the region, let's go to discuss a bit the security situation. It is volatile and unpredictable. Every morning we have something that's really interesting and we've never seen for decades. Let's take Syria. Syria is navigating a fragile and complex post-conflict transition. Over 90% of the Syrians live in poverty, according to the United Nations. The economy is on the brink of collapse. Recently, both the United States and the European Union have announced the easing of economic sanctions. The move is perceived or is seen as a way to prevent civil war, encourage economic recovery, and pave the way for critical investments. Syria needs billions or tens of billions of dollars to rebuild. But despite these diplomatic openings, Syria, as we all hear, continues to face internal serious challenges. Airstrikes, fragile ceasefires, and sectarian tensions. From Syria, let's move to Gaza. Since October 2023, the war in Gaza has added another layer of insecurity and instability. It has led to catastrophic humanitarian consequences. The ongoing conflict threatens to pull the wider region into conflict from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. Now to Lebanon. The role of Lebanon in the equation is significant. It remains central to the region's migration dynamics, maritime security, and offshore energy potential. The President Joseph Aoun and the Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, along with the new government, are fully aware at the moment that reforms are not a choice, they are a necessity. They are working on rebuilding trust with the international partners and community. We are restoring the work of public institutions and re-engaging in regional dialogue and addressing the disarmament of non-state actors. This step will reassert sovereign decision-making and prevent escalation, which can allow Lebanon to return to its historic role as a bridge and not a buffer between East and West. This is easier said than done, and it might take a long time, but we do not have a choice. Lebanon has 1.5 million of Syrians, the highest of Syrian refugees, the highest number per capita in the world. Instability and any failure at this point in time in achieving these necessary reforms risk triggering new wave of irregular migration towards Europe, especially through Cyprus. It is really naive to believe that unrest in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza remains local. Our problem will have clear repercussions on the entire Middle East and beyond. We've seen this before, by the way. We've all seen it when the Syrian war led to over 1 million migrants arriving in Europe in 2015 alone. While most refugees do not pose any security threat, the scale of movement raised serious concerns about terrorism, pressure on borders, and social tensions. And as we are seeing, in some cases, the far-right parties are using these fears to gain support, pushing European politics towards division and stricter migration policies. Criminal networks also are taking advantage of weak borders and desperate people. A few years ago, Italian authorities seized over 1 billion euros worth of drugs smuggled from Syria. I'm gonna finish. Crises in the Eastern Mediterranean don't respect borders. What begins in Lebanon and Syria can quickly become Europe's problem through migration, extremism, and energy disruption. That's why stabilizing these countries is not optional, it's essential. It means fewer people forced to flee, less space for violent actors to grow, and more room for cooperation, trade, and prosperity. Cyprus as a neighbor and as a bridge between Europe and the Middle East, has a vital role to play in shaping this stability. So let's be clear. Supporting stability in the Eastern Mediterranean isn't charity, it's strategy. It protects Europe and helps shape a more secure future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these wonderful remarks, for explicating particularly the benefits of regionalization and regional cooperation, but also the opportunities, especially in Lebanon, and also the costs of not heeding to those opportunities. With that, it's time to turn to the Ambassador of Albania.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Your Excellencies, dear friends, I confirm George's and Nicolaus's viewpoint that this is not a conspiracy. I indeed went to University College, but I studied mathematics, which you might deduce from what I will say next. I'm thankful to the organisers for inviting me for a start, and to the High Commissioner for welcoming us. It's a fantastic initiative that puts diplomats in a new spotlight. Up until recently, we were relegated to rooms, working in the shadows and trying to mediate. Now Facebook and Twitter has given us new purpose, so we need to show up in person and talk to people, become more transparent. And what better reason than for Cyprus? So indeed our discussion spans continents, but at its core it's about vision. About whether regions from Europe to Africa to Asia can chart a common course or become fragmented. Now, I take slight issue with the word fragmented because it has a somewhat negative connotation. I personally believe that the world has changed. It's just different and we need to get used to it. But also work it to our advantage. In the grand scheme of things, the world has become better, but there are pockets of conflict, pockets of strife that we need to work through. Now, in terms of cooperation, since I'm the Ambassador of Albania, I must earn my salary. I will say a few words about it, but I won't go on for too long. Last week we hosted the European Political Community Summit in Tirana, a congregation of quite a few leaders, about 50. It generally doesn't have the format of deliverables coming out with communiques, but the main achievement is to get the leaders to talk to each other. Now, such event in November of last year in Budapest produced a meeting facilitated by Prime Minister Edi Rama, my Prime Minister, that brought together the leaders of Cyprus, Greece and Turkey. A positive event. Now, Albania last week also inherited an election win for the Socialist Party, the then incumbents. Now, they won it on an EU integration ticket, and also because I suspect that the people felt good about the course of the economy. Now, EU integration is a very popular issue in Albania. Popular, but also a positive issue, whether you're in power or opposition. 93% of Albanians believe in EU integration and are for it. In terms of EU accession, we very much hope to gain entry into the EU by 2030, and we're working hard. And with friends like Cyprus next year, it should be even easier. We hope. Now, if we behave. The European Union as a project was created to improve the life for Europeans who'd experienced so many wars and conflicts. And to quote Thomas Hobbes, it was to prevent people from having lives that were nasty, brutish and short. Now, it has its problems, and without prejudice to Britain's exit from the EU, it has largely been a success for the European continent too. Europe today is much more peaceful than it was a century ago. And looking at other bigger countries such as India, Brazil, Mexico, the United States, one can make the point that diverse societies can be held together by shared structures. Now, since 1974, many things have changed for Cyprus, but also for Europe. Now, Europe has changed in the sense that the political polarization into left and right has now morphed into something else, different sets of values, identity, security, and so on. But the European Union structure helps with all of these. That's the very logic of it. Now we come back to the stress and the strain that it is going under, the European Union. We can pose it under a framework of energy, but there's something much more obvious, which is the Russian aggression towards Ukraine. Russia has frankly been quite belligerent in the past few decades, ever since it came out of the Soviet Union. So Europe is reflecting, is changing. It's increasing its spending on defense, but even within it, there are large variations. So, for example, Poland spends not 5% more, not 25% more, not 75% more than Spain, but 300% more. And the whole political landscape across Europe is changing. So we are, on the whole, for EU, but Euroscepticism is on the rise. There are the usual suspects of Slovakia and Ukraine and Hungary, but there are rising voices in Romania, Poland, even France and Germany with the AfD. So can a unified European security architecture truly hold? Or are we heading towards a Europe of concentric circles, of overlapping alliances? Now, Russia's belligerence towards Europe became more powerful because of what we let ourselves in for, our dependence on energy. So we are working towards reducing that, and this is where the Eastern Mediterranean comes handy. Now that is true, but there are also some things to be acknowledged, that certain keys to solution lie not just in Nicosia, but also in Athens and in Ankara, as well as Brussels. Now, I tend to be a positive person, so I'll say that the good signs are that both Turkey and Greece are NATO allies, and in the last few years they haven't really drawn swords, but they have worked together. So there is hope there. The UK too is involved, as Ms. Billing said earlier. It's in the UK's interest to have a prosperous Cyprus, and hopefully a united one soon. Britain's sovereign bases are not just strategically vital, not only for the RAF launchpad, but also Cyprus to Britain is also an intelligence hub, and this is not vital only to Britain, but also to the whole Western Alliance. Now there is something that I wanted to mention very quickly. I wrote things down so that I don't stray off, because I tend to ramble, but feel free to interrupt me. There's migration, which is a big thing. It can be detrimental to the sending country, to the origin country, but it can also cause problems in the destination country. However, there are some misunderstandings, often exacerbated by media, both in Europe and the US. Now, migration also presents solutions. It fills labour gaps and it enriches civic life. Cyprus offers a very positive example not just within Cyprus as a country of various cultures at the crossroads, but also the Cypriot diaspora, with which I've had a lot to do. My first employment in London was at a Cypriot restaurant, which I very much enjoyed. Now, where would we be in Britain without this Greek diaspora? Okay, I'll start with George Michael, but we can go into EasyJet, Stelios Hagiano, and then perhaps DeepMind, two people I worked with at UCL, Mustafa Suleyman and Demis Hassabis, also Nobel Prize winners, I must add. So these are good examples for migration. Perhaps the last thing that I want to say is an example from the Balkans. Something about national myths. It's an opinion, but I strongly believe in it, that regions are shaped not just by borders, by treaties, by pipelines, but also by narratives that we choose to tell. Now, a former scholar of Thomas Hobbes, another Oxford man, Sir Noel Malcolm at All Souls, has written books on the Balkans and the Mediterranean. And he says that some of the most enduring obstacles to peace is not just ancient hatreds, but modern myth-making. Now, for example, there's this myth in the Balkans of this eternal hatred between the Serbs and the Albanians, and therefore we cannot have a prosperous Kosovo, which is very much the current problem that we need solving in the Balkans, alongside Bosnia. Malcolm argues that this was shaped less by medieval battles than by 19th century nationalism. Under Ottoman rule, Christian, Muslim, Jewish communities lived together in relative toleration, and it's only the adoption of Western-style nationalism that fractured this coexistence. And this lesson echoes powerfully in Cyprus. The myth of intractable division, of eternal separation, does not need to become a foundational myth, and we need to be aware of staying this course for too long. So reunification is important because we then have generations of people getting used to this new reality. But I believe that there is a way forward and things will improve. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I could definitely see a formulaic approach to this, to your remarks. You're a true mathematician, but also an apt diplomat. And from the links you've got with Cyprus, I wouldn't be surprised if you take over the High Commissioner's position next. So
No threat.
after he exactly. And Dr. Actually, over to you.
Just speak like, yeah, it works. Okay. Thank you very much for your invitation, and it's an honor to be here with you, Excellencies. And I'm I think, next to you on the academic, but as a speaker, I'm both from Turkey and Cyprus, so I guess it's good to diversify the conversation as well. I'm also a failed diplomat, but that's a story to tell at another event. I'll let you know about this. Okay, so I will be brief. I don't think, how much time do we have? Just 8 minutes, okay. So I think I have two concerns when we designate our region as the Eastern Mediterranean, because the Eastern Mediterranean, kind of non-European Mediterranean, is associated with the terms of conflict or problems, or whether we need to protect Western Europe or Europe from migrants or any problem that comes from us. But to be very honest, Mediterranean, there is one ecosystem in the whole Mediterranean, and all these countries are connected, and the migrant issue, refugee issue, environmental issue, energy issue, these are common problems. These are common global problems. Global commons, what is they are called. So I guess there needs to be a common solution, not only that we need to deal with these problems, but we need to cooperate with, globally and with European Union and Western Europeans to solve these problems. And one actually domain where we can really cooperate is the environment. The environment today, the Mediterranean region warms 20% faster than the rest of the world. And such drastic change brings about floods, heat waves, wildfires, and you know that there is no borders for the environment. When there are problems, especially in Cyprus as well, when there is wildfires in Turkey, there are wildfires in Greece, and there are wildfires everywhere else, because there is, as I said, there is an ecosystem, a common ecosystem there. And these environmental problems are impacting the lives of 1/3 of the regional population. And it has also been reported that due to water scarcity in the region, rising urbanization, the high prevalence of rain-fed agriculture, the southern and eastern Mediterranean are much more vulnerable to climate change than the EU Mediterranean countries. And in terms of Syrian refugees, you know, Turkey is the country that has the highest refugee population in the world. But it's like next to Lebanon, I think it also holds the highest number of Syrian refugees. But in the last years, most of the Syrian refugees who came to Turkey actually fled the drought, the environmental problems, because they were economic migrants as well. So this is, I think, when we talk about environmental problems, we shouldn't disassociate them from these hard security issues. And when we talk about energy issues in the Mediterranean, we need to stress the importance of the green renewable energy as well, not only natural gas, because I understand that economically and strategically it's important, but it's also to be sustainable for the Mediterranean and to keep the Mediterranean, our Mediterranean is a mare nostrum. We need to diversify our energy resources, and we need to go green at some point. And going green, I know it is somehow associated a bit like a more hippie type of thing. So I would like to call it like sustainable defense, sustainable security, sustainable energy as well, because this is how we can actually keep our region together. And this is the only way. I mean, this is one of the, maybe not the only way actually, but this is only one of the strongest paths where we can really cooperate. Because another thing that we associate the Eastern Mediterranean is always conflict and problems, as I mentioned before. But this doesn't need to be this way. And I have been working on environmental geopolitics since 2021, and between countries Turkey, Greece, Egypt, Israel. And mind you, there are a lot of environmentalists from these countries cooperate with each other. Maybe at the institutional level, but at the high state level, maybe there is not so much cooperation, but these environmentalists cooperate with each other. And we found out about Turkish environmentalists working on a project from the Greek environmentalists, for instance, when we were doing some work on the Greek islands. And now I'm working on another British Academy-funded project about the local ownership of green energy transition in Turkey, Crete, Greece, and Italy. And this is also to understand that there's a Mediterranean link, and this link doesn't have to be only Eastern Mediterranean, but there's a link that goes from non-European Mediterranean to European Mediterranean, or from east to west, or from south to north. So we are much more connected than we think, and our problems are common problems. So we need to find solutions together, I think, and this is the path for cooperation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Actually, obviously the parameter of the environment is quintessential, but if I may push back, because it's also my field of expertise, some would argue, including myself, that if the Egypt-led initiative, the EMGF, had worked out and we had enabled natural gas to flow to Europe, would have very likely been able to deter Russia from invading Ukraine, because they wouldn't have the resources that we have now. And also perhaps that would also deter whatever's happened in Gaza. So perhaps, paradoxically, more natural gas would mean less environmental damage. But we can return to that in the discussion. Before we open up the floor to the audience, I would like to exercise my moderator privilege and ask a question very briefly to our panelists, because you've done an exceptional job of explicating all the important problems that affect regionalization, whether they are within the region, whether they're in Europe, whether they're global. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the primary challenge and the primary opportunity? Where does it come from? Do you think regionalization will succeed? And lastly, how will that fit within competing visions of the world? Because as you've explicated, I think all of you very well, the Eastern Mediterranean has been a crucial part, a crucial corridor for global processes. The Chinese-led maritime Silk routes, but also now the American, India, Middle East, European corridor, the so-called IMEC. So how do you think the region will fit within this diverse, if not fragmented, visions of the world? Shall we begin? Please, yes.
First of all, I have to thank again the rest members of the panel, because in their own way they painted the picture that we were trying to project here today, that we come from a region that is unfortunately full of conflicts, but at the same time there are prospects, and when logic prevails and right leadership, and when we can manage to convince other stakeholders, things can move to the right direction. We are unlucky that our Indian colleague couldn't make it. At the last moment, he had to go abroad. He would have pitched in on a very interesting aspect that it is on development, and I think it will help this discussion enlarge the understanding of the prospects of our region. And East Mediterranean is part of a wider picture. I come from that school of thought that I'm not good in watching the tree, I prefer watching the forest. And the forest in the particular case is the IMEC, is the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. This is a new discussion now at the level, at the highest level. We are talking about connectivity on a very broad manner. There will be those who will see that it has an adversarial to the Chinese corridor. I don't represent a superpower, so on my perspective, it's better to see. I walk by the Thames, and sometimes I watch these beautiful bridges, one after the other. No one is the same, but they all play their unique role connecting one part of London to the other. So if Cyprus, with the immediate neighbors and the excellent relations we have towards Asia, Africa, and Europe, could be a part of this wonderful adventure, it will be beneficial to more than us, or the next one, or the next one. We have a lot of American companies for the drillings of the natural gas. If the new administration in Washington wants also to be part, they are invited. We see Britain, and this is a message from myself to Britain, the asset they have in the 21st century in Cyprus is not the military bases. It's the collaboration with the authorities of the Republic of Cyprus. Because we are not the Cyprus Republic of the 1960s, we are not the Republic of the 1970s, we are the 21st century. I have a government which most of the members are younger than the Cyprus issue. So we are an extrovert, we are members of European Union, not of the non-alignment as it was at the beginning. We try to see the bigger picture. We want to be a benefit, a positive actor. And through these processes, our own adversary is always invited to see also the bigger picture to their interest and pitch in, and maybe it's about time to grow and move to directions that brings peace and prosperity to all concerned. Thank you, George.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for giving us a glimpse of that forest. I think it's critical when talking about the East Mediterranean. Should we start the other way, perhaps, now, and go from Dr. Aksheli all the way to Ambassador Sharif?
I mean, we are talking about this new regionalization and the new powers, and I think it was. I agree with you that there are new powers emerging in the Mediterranean, and China is an intriguing one. And China is. I know that there's different perspectives about China in the UK, but usually it's also, especially in the case of renewable energy, it's seen as a partner. It's one of the biggest investors in the region about renewable energy, China. So this also brings a kind of a different dimension, right? I mean, rather than more hard security issues, different type of cooperation. And how about these new Eurasian power shifts, where we can also identify as maybe non-Western hegemonies that is emerging? What type of impact they have on this? Because how we call this, maybe we can call this a multipolar world. I don't know if you'd agree with me that there is a multipolar world emerging, right? Or multipolarity. And this multipolarity, I think, is creating opportunities for several countries to diversify their foreign policy and to create even a new identity. And even I was speaking with, because I work at the Defense Department also, with course members, with military officers from different countries of the world. And even for Japan, and Japan is just under the US hegemony since the Second World War, but even this multipolarity has a kind of can create an opportunity for Japan to diversify its foreign policy. So I think we are the shifts, there are some shifts, and I think it would be interesting, and now I don't want to go into fortune telling, but obviously these shifts and this new multipolarity, this new Eurasian influence, it will have an impact on the Mediterranean as well. And as well, I mean, Turkey is also new, in the last 20 years, it was maybe a more introvert. I mean, it was mostly a Mediterranean country, a NATO country, but as we know, that it has also diversified its foreign policy. And it's also creating, I mean, it's extended its sphere of influence, not only in the Middle East, but also in Africa now, and also in Asia, in other parts. So it's a very intriguing NATO ally. It is an ally, it's a NATO member, but it's also a very intriguing country in the region as well. And now Israel, and with these new developments in Syria, are we really experiencing this all a new shaping of the on the Middle East, or with the emphasis going to China now? I mean, these new Western countries putting their more emphasis on China. I'm also thinking that maybe for the first time in its history, the Middle East, the Mediterranean will be left alone a little bit. To the members, to its members, like to the countries, to the Mediterranean. So it will be for us, instead of talking about these new hegemons that we have been talking about since decades, US, before Britain, I mean, since the end of the Ottoman Empire, right? I mean, the Western hegemons in the region. Maybe because, I mean, they will like to leave us to ourselves, and we will need to figure out how to shape the region ourselves.
Thank you, Ambassador.
I'll make a short point about what I observe as a sort of a tale of competing narratives, that it's either this or the other. And it often happens in the world that not all games are zero-sum games. And when it comes to, I think, say, gas and oil exploration in the Eastern Med, the whole point is not just short-term profit, but it's about creating what the High Commissioner said, this interdependability and the cooperation to have all these countries connected with each other so that they work better. I think all of this does lead or provides a good grounding for political solutions, and at the very least for an absence of aggressions. We've seen that with the case of China and Taiwan. Since China was mentioned, that one could argue that interdependence has stopped China from attacking, and the development of China, the prosperity in that region has helped. So I think any initiative, I won't go whether it's green or fossil-based, will be good for the region in the long run.
Thank you for that positive note. I think we need that.
I'll try to stay positive as well. I'm proudly a graduate from the Defense Department at King's College. So I would like to mention that when I was at university, we mainly, in every course, we used to talk about globalization. Now we're talking about regionalization. I really worry about globalization, but that's not the issue at the moment. My question is why we always react and we do not act. We are always reacting. We are always just, when something happens, we start thinking what to do. We increase our defense spendings because we realize that the United States will not be supporting us anymore in the war to fight the war in Ukraine against the Russians. Another example, we have the announcement of the new tariffs, and then we react and we worry about the economy and we see what to do. At the end of the day, I mean, these are countries, the United States has the right to decide whatever they want to decide. I'm not concerned about that, I'm not discussing that or arguing whether it's positive or negative. The only thing I'm saying is that acting and making decisions, building a long-lasting peace in our area in the Eastern Mediterranean, really thinking about the future and planning for the future might be very beneficial. And the uncertainty is really unsettling for us all. So the cooperation and just trying to resolve the current conflict will be very, very helpful.
Thank you, Violet. Speaking of globalization, actually, a great British scholar, Barry Buzan, attributed the retrenchment, the regionalization, the deglobalization to the end of the Cold War, so the end of great power conflict. So perhaps the rise of new poles, if they're competing, will mean that we'll return to a globalized security system, and that means that perhaps we will need to account for great power interests. But just a thought, not to hold the Egyptian ambassador, who I'm sure will give us his remarkable insight.
You've mentioned that the Middle East might be left to its own devices. I think some of us would very much welcome that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But also I think the discussion about globalization and regionalization is very interesting. I've spent my entire professional career, more than 30 years, within the globalization era. And it's interesting that over the last few months even, we're seeing that we are moving away, or at least some of us are moving away of that, and we are starting to discover the disadvantages of globalization and taking certain policies or actions because globalization is not a good thing. I think as a diplomat and as practitioners, it's rather about what are your objectives. Not only your day-to-day objectives, obviously, you need to plan for the next short-term and medium-term and even longer-term, but it's also in terms of serving our countries and our peoples. And this is a very critical objective, I'm sure, for all countries. So, yes, of course, there are implications for focusing more on regionalization. However, to your point about the biggest challenge in the region, and we have, unfortunately, numerous challenges, but I think the biggest challenge we have is the instability that we are suffering from. And looking forward, I'd love to be optimistic, and there are reasons to feel optimistic in certain cases, but overall, it is very difficult to be confident about what will happen in the region in the next few years, because what has happened over the last 2-3 years, because of reasons within the region, also because of global changes, give us a feeling that this instability might continue. The war in Gaza, the horrible war in Gaza, but also the implications did not stop there. It moved also to other countries, Syria, for one, in terms of expansion of occupation to other areas, also within Lebanon, having more parts still being controlled by Israel. Then also you have other players in the region and outside in terms of what might be happening. We talk about maybe a multipolar world or what have you. I think Egypt, and I'm sure our colleague, the High Commissioner of India, would have shared the same opinion had he been here with us this morning. it is not about these competing players and whether you want to be on this side or that side. I think it is an important region. It's not as if these proposals are new, because obviously we are already connecting. We are already a bridge between East and West. Of course, it's good to have new ideas and new projects and trying to expand. But from the perspective of countries within the region, I think we stand to benefit from these different sort of proposals. It doesn't have to be this one or that one. I agree, it is not always, it shouldn't be a zero-sum game, because it's not about who becomes the victor. It is about how can we serve our countries, our region, and by the way, when you serve your country and your region, you also serve the world at large. And I think I also agree that East Mediterranean as a region, which we do not use as such, but it is a geographical region, which is quite diverse because of the civilizations, the history, the different cultures, and so on. But I think the whole Mediterranean also is quite unique in a certain way, not only the East Mediterranean. And although there are differences between Europe, between Africa, between the Arab world and the Middle East, but still, that is the strength of that region. As I said at the beginning, I think it is the only geographical spot where you really have three continents connecting. And this is not only in terms of geography, it goes beyond that in terms of the history, the culture, and the opportunities. The opportunities are immense in that region. And when we haven't mentioned this this morning, but when you look a little bit beyond that to the Gulf, where you also have new players coming up, and we don't have to look at this always as many questions and many people would discuss as, you know, what is negative about this development. It is a development. It is a reality. It is a fact that we have to deal with, because we have new players. How can we work with the new players and the old players to make sure that we get the best outcome of this?
Thank you, Ambassador. And you're absolutely right. Instability is the biggest challenge. I agree with you. And perhaps that's where more of Egypt-led, because it's a regional now framework, like the EMGF can work. And if we borrow from the English school, right, and instead of the liberal or realist kind of understandings of systemic characteristics driving acts of behavior, perhaps, as the English school says, it's the logic of cooperation, the logic of regionalization that can actually be the key. And that's, I think, where initiatives that were launched in Cairo, like the EMGF, are very valuable. But we have some time for questions. Let's take 3 questions together to make sure we have enough time to ask them all. I see a question there.
Westminster. I'm a China analyst, and despite appearances, I'm actually from Cyprus. So my question is quite China-related. People are saying we might not, Cyprus and other countries might not have to choose between systems, but given the tensions between the US and China, it seems increasingly likely that some countries will have to pick a side. In the case of Cyprus, we saw a few years ago, a Chinese state-owned company won the contract for the Vasiligo terminal. There were some complications with that. In Egypt, we're seeing China's investing a lot in their space capabilities. So I want to ask briefly the panelists if they can talk about where they think how they're going to navigate the US-China trade tensions. Well, not just trade tensions, but political tensions there as well.
Yes, will we have to choose sides, I suppose is the question. Any more questions? I've got a question over there.
Good morning. My name is Tanisa. I'm the head of multilateral at the South African High Commission, still coming to terms with what happened last night in the Oval Office. Had to switch one's phone off, because sometimes even as a diplomat we need to pause and recoup and recover. Thank you to Cyprus and to my beloved Cypriot colleague who invited, probably one of 2 Africans in the crowd, from Ambassador from Egypt, the 3rd. Just wanted to first say my first posting was in The Hague as legal counselor, and I had the pleasure to serve with Ambassador Kouros, who was the ambassador to the Netherlands at the time, and really interesting to serve with you again in London. Diplomacy is a big profession, but also very small, and we seem to run in different circles. I also have the privilege of being accepted to Oxford, to Wolfson College. Sadly, I don't have £100,000 to go, so one is waiting for a scholarship. I've enjoyed everybody's inputs today, but I particularly liked the mathematicians and the civil engineers, because I think, and of course, Ambassador Kouros, and this takes nothing away from ladies, of course I'm a feminist, some of you will remember the Netflix show, The Diplomat, when Ambassador Hal spoke at Chatham House down the road, and he said one of the things he regrets is during his time as an ambassador, he didn't go to shake hands with a former terrorist or rebel, and he said that set him back 5 years, those negotiations. So one of the things I tell people is, you know, when they ask why, what is a diplomat, or what do you do? And my response is always, but what don't I do? And then they say, no, seriously, but what do you do? And I say, our job is to avoid war. Our job is literally to build bridges. When my little children ask me, Mummy, but who do you work for? Because you're always talking to High Commissioner or the DHC, I say, I literally work for South Africa. Because we're not here just to have a lovely diplomatic allowance and live in North London. It's because we're here to serve a greater purpose. Now, the things with what's going on bilaterally between my own country and the US, and also speaking about globalization versus regionalism, and the fact that so many young students I meet within IR in politics, etc., ask me, is it worth becoming a diplomat? Is it worth going this route? Because it seems as if your work has taken you from the shadows, and we have been in the shadows, to the limelight. And so how would our panelists say to those wanting to join these careers why it is still worth becoming a diplomat, firstly, and also what is the role of a diplomat in such a fragmented world? And the old allies and relationships we once had, does that not open the space for us to create new and better relationships? Because friends that were purportedly enemies are not necessarily enemies, because if you change the narrative, according to what the Albanian ambassador said. I apologize for that long-winded diatribe, but I would appreciate your inputs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the existential question. I'm happy I'm not a diplomat and having to answer that, but should we squeeze in one more question before we turn the speakers over there?
Thank you. Zizat Darkazali, I'm with Chatham House Associate Fellow. You mentioned Chatham House, and I'm like, my question, we talk about regionalization, as you mentioned. I just wonder about the Gulf region and how, whether with emerging powers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and I know that Cyprus collaborated with the UAE when it went to the maritime corridor. I just wonder whether the panelists think that Gulf collaboration would strengthen the East Med stability, and if there's any way of incorporating that, giving its influence also on what's happening in Syria, in Lebanon, and also its role when it comes to Gaza and Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you. I know there's a lot to unpack there, but may I ask for brief answers to those questions, as brief as possible? I know there's a lot there, just to make sure we stick within the schedule. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now, being brief. Good luck about the Chinese thing if you want from a diplomat a clear answer. Yes. Usually in my career, what I learned is that when giants collide, the big guys make room enough for them to enjoy the collision. In the case of China, what Cyprus is doing is trying to use other countries as a compass. So we check what the British are doing with them, we check what the Dutch are doing with them, and then we try to maneuver around it. That's the only frank answer I can give you on that question. About the prospects in the region, trying to be extremely compact. There is wealth there. We took notice of it 15 years ago. We reached out to our neighbors. We managed to have agreements of delimitation first with Egypt, then with Israel, Lebanon. We also started talking with Syria, but after 2011, that became a very difficult aspect. That were their immediate neighbors with whom we had to engage in conversation. And even with Turkey, we had a proposal, let's come and talk about the prospects of delimitation, and irrespective of the current situation, if the Turkish Cypriots could sit on our side when this engagement happened, maybe there was an opportunity. And that was a very bold approach if you take consideration the complications. So you see, prosperity, and if you have the right leadership in capitals and circumstances help, could give you some opportunities. And then it's up to the historian to judge why this went that way or other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who doesn't love a good historian, right? Shall we mix things up and go to Violet next?
Sure. So I'll start with China and the United States. So we can only wish good luck to the negotiators to reach an agreement, so we don't have to take sides, because that's another problem that the world is going to face. And we have to agree that if we have to go through down this route, it can have great repercussions. So I'm not going to choose sides. We're just really hoping that diplomacy will win. Regarding the diplomats and their role, I'm not a diplomat, but definitely at this point in time, I sound, that's very, very, we always hear this, but yes, building bridges and avoiding more wars, more conflicts, and bringing people together is the only way forward. Because, I mean, when the war starts, we never know when it's ending. This is what happened in Ukraine, in Syria, 2011, in Lebanon, in Gaza. So that's where we need our diplomats. And the last question about the Gulf. So about the Gulf, I'm going to just mention few events that happened in the last couple of weeks. The visit of President Trump to Saudi Arabia. We had President Al-Shara being there and meeting with President Trump. We have the Abraham Accord that's been very much on the table between the UAE, now Saudi Arabia. And nobody, I mean, we didn't mention the Iranian nuclear deal as well, and what's happening with the United States. So to answer the question regarding the Gulf, and from a Lebanese perspective, this is what we are very much working on, building bridges again, and with the region, with the Gulf. They were always supporting Lebanon. They were always helping Lebanon. And we are really hoping that this is going to succeed, so we get out of the isolation that we've put ourselves into. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ambassador Faizi, I'm counting on you for some mathematical precision there.
Well, you have put me on the spot. Times have changed, and I'll return to diplomacy, but times have changed since the joke of how can you tell an engineer from a mathematician? And there are variations on the answer, but the first is that an engineer would look at your shoes while talking to you. A mathematician would look at his own shoes. Now, I tried to move on, and I went into neuroscience, so I became slightly Cartesian about my thoughts. But you're right that the diplomat's role has evolved. It's not just a mere communication from the times of the emissary, the minister, the Çavuş of the Ottoman Empire. It's now, with the advent of Twitter and Facebook, the leaders communicate with each other a lot more easily than they used to. Now it's about this in-person contact, talking to people, smoothing the way, ultimately building bridges. So I absolutely agree with you. Now, I may disappoint a few people by becoming rather undiplomatic in giving an answer, a straight answer to a straight question. Have you picked a side? Albania has picked a side. We're Euro-Atlanticists. So we're all for the EU and the US.
Thanks for that answer.
Precise answer.
Absolutely, mathematical indeed.
Very short answer to this Chinese and picking of sides. And I think in international relations, what we see, the countries are always very pragmatic. Even in the harshest or strictest sanctions, we know that all countries actually find a way to go around those sanctions as well. Even in the Russian case, you know that so many European countries bought Russian gas through Kazakhstan, right? So, I mean, there are so many different ways. And when we look at the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, I'm surprised that Saudi Arabia is the most pro-American, pro-Western country in the Gulf, one of them. And they also, they cooperate so much with China as well, about it so many levels. So I think there's a lot of pragmatism, and I think the countries are all used to this. We are, all countries are used to this. I don't think it's going to be one way or the other, and I think that they will always find a way, and especially in the Middle East, I think, there's always this bargaining quality, and then they will always try to find a way, I think. It's just the bazaar tactics in the Mediterranean, I think. We know how to do it well.
Absolutely, it definitely helps. We have 400 billion to give to the Americans, but for the concluding
I'll try to be very brief. I know everybody is looking for the next coffee cup we're going to have, but on the issue of China, yes, we will try to navigate, all countries will try to navigate. You talk about investments, for example, in Egypt from China, but obviously there are many investments also from the UK, from Germany, from Italy, from India. The point is, countries, and I've been part of some discussions also in different fora and maybe in different countries, within the African group, for example, where African diplomats would be asked about their choice of Chinese financing. And the response that they give is, but what is the alternative? Are you ready to stand and fill the gap if we stop that finance? So sometimes countries might not have a choice but to take whatever is there. And some other countries have their interest and needs served by having this combination, and we are open to everyone. But I think it's not only about navigating, because when you have certain collisions in the world, and obviously you're talking about maybe, hopefully not a very big collision, all countries in the world suffer and pay a price. The war in Ukraine, for example, where you had many players in the world involved, we've all suffered beyond belief in terms of energy prices for my country, in terms of wheat prices for Africa, in terms of availability of wheat. So it is not only standing by and watching. I think it is very important. That's part of the change in the world, that countries are not doing enough efforts to prevent wars, to try to make sure that we can work and cooperate together. And we need each other even more. Regardless, we call it globalization or regionalization. The world is very much connected today. In terms of diplomat, and obviously we are very proud of our own profession, but I think, and I was mentioning this before we started today, the most important thing I took from my 32 years of service, serving in 5 different countries in Europe, in America, in Asia, in the Arab world, and coming from Africa as well, is that the commonalities between us are much, much more than what keeps us apart. But it's only politicians and media when they focus on the differences, and then we see these confrontations. So I think diplomats' role are still very important. When we serve and live in one country, we understand that country much better, and we are able to communicate back to our own capital how decisions are being made and why certain decisions are being made, hoping to build these bridges. And it's not only that, sometimes when relations between countries are flowing, also you need diplomats to make sure that you put certain breaks in terms of the different dimensions of that relationship. Finally, on the Gulf, and it's a very important development happening, not only in the region, obviously, but all over the world, given the visits we've seen last week, also the role some Gulf countries played in terms of Ukraine and Russia and exchanges, but definitely in terms of our region, with Syria and so on. I think it is an important development, but the impact of that important development will depend on how Gulf countries, especially the active ones among them, will use this leverage to promote objectives that we might all agree on. If this is used in the right way, because obviously they do have leverage that is lacking in many, many quarters of the world, and here I'm even talking probably about Europe, where I don't think that you would have the US president coming and getting the same kind of offerings he got last week. So it is an important development. We hope, and we should be also doing our role in terms of our discussions with these countries to make sure that they can use that leverage to make the region and the world a better place.
On that lovely note, thank you very much for joining this fantastic, fascinating discussion, and thank you very much to our remarkable speakers for sharing your rich insight with us. And I learned a lot myself. I hope this has been the same with everyone in the panel, and I am very much hoping to see you all in a future Cyprus Forum session. Thank you. Please join me in applauding our speakers.
Thank you to our first panel for fascinating and timely conversation. We do not have a coffee break now, but everyone can take like 3-4 minutes. Welcome back. We now turn to our second session, Cyprus Prospects for the Future through the eyes of the diaspora. The Cyprus diaspora continues to play an essential role in shaping Cyprus identity, influence, and development abroad. And our esteemed panelists are Ilke Dagli-Hastings, Director General at the Center for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development, Christos Tsoudon, President of NEPOMAC, Christos Karaolis, President of the National Federation of Cypriots in the UK, Mr. Bambos Charalambous, Member of Parliament for Southgate and Wood Green, and Mr. Christos Passas, Director at Zaha Hadid Architects. And the session will be moderated by Latika Burke, a journalist at The Nightly. Please join me in welcoming the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We won't take it personally that half the room seems to have vacated. At least it means you all have a bit more fresh air and more space. I'm Latika. It's very nice to be here, and we have a great panel for you this morning to discuss the Cypriot diaspora and the challenges, but also some of the positive experiences and trends that the diaspora experiences in light of the recent geopolitical changes particularly. So just to kick us off, we're going to introduce each of the panellists very quickly and ask them to talk about what they do. And we're going to start firstly on the end. Ilko, if you'd like to start.
It's on. Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for having me, for the invitation and for the opportunity to contribute. I'm Ilke. I'm kind of diaspora. It's hard to say I'm diaspora because actually I've been living here on and off for 15 years, and I married a colonial and I grew up in Famagusta. But also my organization is headquartered in Cyprus, so I actually, all the work, programs, research and projects we do are still linked to Cyprus and other fragile and conflict-affected countries. My background is in security and development, and I particularly looked at how identities and security perceptions change faster than negotiation parameters. And I was doing this comparatively, looking at Cyprus, but also Transnistria, Moldova, Ossetia, Abkhazia, and looking at how these security perceptions and identities change a lot faster than negotiation parameters. That's about me, but I will pass the mic over here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bambos. Probably needs no introduction, but always interested to hear how MPs describe themselves.
I'm Bambos Charalambous. I'm the MP for Southgate and Wood Green. I first got elected in June 2017. The constituency then was Enfield Southgate. I do represent a number of, a large part of the diaspora, both Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and have done since I was elected. And I'm a backbench MP. Labour is now in government. So my party is now trying to make a good fist of being government. Prior to that, I was a Shadow Immigration Minister and also Shadow Middle East Minister, and also had some roles in the Shadow Home Office team as well. So that's my background.
Thank you so much, Pembos. Okay, we have 3 Christoses in the panel, so just to keep it nice and simple for the moderator at least, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Christos Kariotis. I'm president of the National Federation of Cypriots in the UK. The Federation is the umbrella body for the Cypriot diaspora here in the UK with 80 member organisations. And we represent the diaspora both to the government of the UK but also the government of Cyprus, and our goals are kind of twofold. Firstly, obviously to advocate for the reunification of Cyprus in line with the agreed UN framework, but secondly to advance and promote our kind of proud and vibrant Cypriot diaspora here in the UK.
Thank you, Christos.
Hi, I'm Christos Passas. I'm a design director at Zaha Hadid Architects. I've worked with the late Zaha Hadid for about 20 years before she passed away in 2016. I've been at the forefront of development of cities and architecture around the world. I've worked in China, in the Middle East, extensively in Russia and the former Soviet republics, and also in our beloved Cyprus for an extensive amount of time. I'm also part of the parochial community here in London, where we participate in growing Greek schools for kids to maintain connection with home and the culture, and also help the parochial communities to thrive in this ever-challenging world.
And Christos.
Hi, I'm Christos Chutin. I'm the president of Nepalmac, which is a diaspora youth organisation for Cypriots aged 18 to 30. We primarily represent kind of second and third generation Cypriots, and we have branches all around the world. So we have a branch in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Greece, France, and there's a small community in Zimbabwe as well. And our work is about bringing young Cypriots together and connecting them with Cyprus and their cultural and heritage.
So we've got some interesting generational differences here, and I think, Christos, I want to start with you. How engaged is the diaspora, and how have you noticed that level of engagement change over the time you've been in the role?
So the Cypriot diaspora here is absolutely moving into its second, third and fourth generation. So the first generation of Cypriots obviously did what they could when they came over from Cyprus with the constraints they had around language, money, etc. My generation, our generation coming through, is very much part of mainstream British society. We are fully ingrained in every walk of life here in the UK. And that presents both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is obviously you're not as physically or emotionally proximate to the island as the first generation because you weren't born there. And so that's why what Christos speaks about in terms of the community Greeks or something like that are really important to maintain those links. But it also presents a huge opportunity because the networks that we move in are very different to the networks that the first generation moved in. So professionally, I'm a partner in a consultancy firm. So I deal with CEOs, CFOs, etc. So your ability to actually raise awareness and advocate for Cyprus is exponentially greater than the first generation because of the networks you move in and because of the background that you have. So actually the challenge for us as a federation, as a community, is how do we maintain those links back to the island and that passion and that pride for Cyprus amongst subsequent generations. And, you know, from what I see, my generation does remain proud of Cyprus. And don't, you know, I wouldn't misread the fact that you maybe don't see hordes of people parading themselves around as a lack of interest or excitement for Cyprus. People are passionate in their own way. Con over there's a great example. He'll be on the next panel. But, you know, he's deeply passionate and proud about Cyprus and, you know, has a fantastic job at Bloomberg. You know, we have really great examples of people who, when they need to, do stuff for Cyprus. They might not be there everywhere all the time, but when they're needed, they are around. And the one thing I would say about Brexit is that I do think that awakened maybe a latent sentiment in the diaspora, because we have seen a really significant step change in engagement post-Brexit as second and third generation have started looking for their roots. where they might, and there's obviously, I'm not going to be naive to the fact there is obviously a tactical advantage. They might want an EU passport, so I'm not naive to that. But I do think there is a deeper emotional connection where actually the younger generation have started to explore some of that. And so we've certainly seen an uptick in engagement from younger generation immediately post-Brexit as well.
Yeah, fascinating. Christos Passos, I would love to hear from you, your story. You're a refugee. Maybe you could talk to us a bit about some of those distinctions that Christos was talking about, how you have found the changes in the diaspora and also your own, I guess, relationship with the diaspora and your own view about how you are a shepherd of this and a custodian of this.
So thanks for asking the question. I think, like so many other Cypriots, being a refugee in today's world is a very interesting experience to try to have humanistic and first-hand sort of empathy for what is going on in the world so extensively. But also becoming a refugee, I think in my 50s now, I'm beginning to realize that the loss of home, especially at a very young age, is a very kind of drastic effect that forces you to develop survival mechanisms that are not perhaps embedded in everybody. And I think that gives you also a different sort of relationship to the world. Through my work with Zaha Hadid Architects, we have had, after many years of working internationally and exploring ideas of what a new world could be, I think we are now, I'm going to try to loop this all together because for two reasons. First of all, the previous panel spoke from a very multilateral point of view, but always within a geopolitical framework. I think there is also another layer of conversation that needs to be had, which is the identity politics that goes beyond kind of the interests of countries, capitalist interests, but go beyond to how we identify ourselves. And then there is another level, I think, which is beyond identity that we need to start exploring as humanity. But altogether, I think we live in a kind of a postmodern makeup where identities are very much fragmented. So, like Christos is saying, we can be here, first, second, third generation Cypriots of the diaspora, but we are equally British as much as we are, Cypriots, maybe, to varying degrees. And what we always talk about is that you never quite feel at home anywhere, So
you
that
still feel
in
like
between,
that?
Yes. So my daughter doesn't because she was born here, to my pain and suffering, but she feels like that. It's everybody's life, even within the same families, has different nuances to it. So back to the postmodern sort of condition, I think the role of diaspora is changing. Also, the role of a country state is changing drastically. So Cyprus is no longer the island that is thrown off some sort of corner of the Eastern Mediterranean. It's a very expansive network of activities and people, and so is every other country, to be frank. So country states are no longer within their own geographical boundaries. It's very important to understand that. It's also very important to understand what it is that we project as cultural entities and what it is that we want the world to know about us, whether we are Americans, Indians, Russians, Ukrainians, whatever, from whichever. There's 193 countries, but there is like 10,000 types of different cultural identities. And I think it's important to begin to recognize that. And beyond that, I think if I can also mention one more thing, in terms of the diaspora, our role and our link here is to preserve and recreate those cultural identities. And in doing so, I think we maybe hope to preserve the richness of the humankind as has been developed over millennia.
Christos, I hadn't planned it like this, but I'm going to come to you because I think what Christos there has talked about are some really interesting questions for you. You operate an international arm. What is the diaspora trying to achieve if you have a single message through all of those countries? Where do you see the engagement is greatest? And how difficult or how easy is it in this modern world to ensure that all these desired projections of Cyprus and the Cypriot communities are indeed reflected the way you want them to be?
I think it's been fascinating to kind of see how, in my experience, I've been in the organisation for 10, 11 years now, so I'm right at the end of the age range. But I think it's been really interesting to see how kind of diverse the diaspora is in a way. I kind of came at it and joined the organisation with kind of my own background and experience, which was growing up in North London, kind of a very highly concentrated Cypriot community. And I met people who were kind of from all different corners of the UK, all different parts of the world, who were coming at it just from a very different perspective. So I think what we've kind of acknowledged and realised is that actually what needs to be offered to the diaspora is a very diverse thing. We need to be able to connect with people who are interested in learning the language of Cyprus, in kind of learning about kind of traditional dance or culture or food or kind of even just visiting the island itself. So what you see is that people kind of bring what their family's background, their family's story is to the organisation. And so we've had to adapt and offer kind of a diverse range of opportunities for people to connect with Cyprus. And I think what you find, and that presents a challenge, right? So you have to kind of have enough kind of pockets for people to engage. But you also have to just be kind of, I think, conscious that not everybody does have the same experience of their Cypriot heritage as you might. And it is really important to understand what those points of connection are. And I think you see kind of interesting here in the perspectives there about kind of never feeling quite at home. I think what you find is that you get this real energy when you meet other people from the Cypriot diaspora, especially if you haven't had many cousins or friends around you that when you were growing up. And so what we kind of see through the organisation is that people are coming at it from such a diverse set of backgrounds, but actually there's that spark that's just lit when they get the opportunity to engage with Cyprus. And that's kind of in a way that people who maybe were born and raised in Cyprus won't experience, that kind of the switching on of their Cypriot identity. And I think that's a really powerful thing to kind of see, and I've seen it on so many occasions in the organisation.
Bambas, in your time as an MP, you've been in opposition. Now, as you mentioned, you're making a good go at government. Good go is subjective, just kidding. How have you seen the climate for political interest in the Cypriot cause over your time, and how is that changing for you now as a government backbencher as opposed to an opposition one?
There's always been an interest in Cyprus amongst parliamentarians, but there has also been a big churn in members of parliament, both in 2019 and in 2024. So that means sometimes you have to remind people what's happening in Cyprus, but people do have a fond connection with Cyprus, whether that's as a holiday destination, whether they've worked there. One former member of parliament got married in Cyprus, so there is that connection. So it's already you already have a way in when you discuss that. Although people will often just raise it with me, so they would just say, "Oh, you're from Cyprus. I was there not so long ago." There's also a parliamentary armed services scheme, and one of the places that this is where MPs shadow the Air Force, the Navy, the Army. They go to various places where there are bases. So some parliamentarians will be going to Cyprus in June. They'll be visiting Akrodiri, and that'll be part of their scheme. So there's already that connection. It's always been quite easy to raise it with the Foreign Affairs team of the day. So, although in the last administration there were a number of Europe ministers, so you had to start all over again with whoever was the Europe minister that week. But
we knew this one was coming.
Yeah. But Stephen Doughty, who is the Europe minister, he understands the issue very well. He has been very engaged, and I think the difference that we're seeing now is that you have a Foreign Affairs team that is very keen to play a bigger role.
And to what end? To achieve what? What progress do you think your government might make by the end of your 5 years?
Well, to be, number one, it's being engaged with internationally to use the UK's influence, and bear in mind the UK has had a very long connection with Cyprus, but also further afield across Europe. So you've seen this coalition of the willing. So again, that probably wouldn't have happened under the previous administration. So the desire to be more involved in trying to help resolve conflicts or long-trenched, frozen situations that might need help. So I think that willingness to be more involved is a very welcome new role that's being played. I think understanding the issues, not just relying on officials, and actually having that deeper knowledge is also helpful for the ministers. And I mean, with Stephen, he was a shadow minister in that role for at least 4 years. So 3 years, 4 years. So he's had all those connections. So I was a shadow minister, so much of it is about meeting lots of different groups, meeting lots of different ambassadors, lots of different ministers, building on those connections. So when you are finding a position where you can influence things, you've already established those connections. So Stephen and David and others in the team have done that really well, and I think that's allowed them to hit the ground running. So that does make a big difference. So I think you will see the UK playing a very delicate but helpful role in trying to resolve issues.
Can I be,
yes, please.
Can I be more explicit than Bambos maybe wants to be? And given I know we have Matthew here from the Foreign Office team, our expectation from the UK is that actually it does get Turkey back to the negotiating table on the agreed UN framework, that actually it plays an active role in terms of getting us to a solution that is fully in line with the UN framework, that kind of ends the kind of guarantees and foreign troops on the island, because the UK has a strong interest in the island and what happens there. So I'll be a little bit more direct than Bambos, but that's our expectation.
That's the ask. How confident are you that there will be progress made on that?
Look, I mean, I think it's going to depend on a couple of dimensions. One, there's now there's an EU envoy as well. So the EU envoy has a really critical role to play because a post-solution Cyprus is going to be in the EU. So the EU needs to be at the table during the talks. And so if we can get the EU involved, if we can get Turkey back to the table on the agreed UN framework, and what President Christodoulidis is doing in terms of positive incentives to get Turkey back to the table, it is the right outlook. That can be reinforced by the UK as well, right? The UK is going to be talking about a trade deal with Turkey soon. There's going to be something that, in the same vein as the EU is looking at positive incentives, the UK could be doing the same. So really it hinges on getting Turkey back to the table. If we can do that, and the UK has a critical role to play, then there should be an alignment of incentives that get us there. I recognise there's elections in the north that are due soon, so that's a whole different kettle of fish that we need to deal with, but that doesn't absolve anyone of their responsibility.
Ilka, I don't know if you want to take this one specifically or anyone else on the panel, but if you're sitting in the Foreign Office right now, you're not short of things on your plate, and you're certainly not short of conflicts that are a little hotter to deal with right now, here today. How much do you think Cyprus gets a look in this climate?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think it builds on to the first panel as well, because I think at the first glance, Cyprus is a comfortable conflict, right? In the bigger scheme of things, it's a very comfortable conflict, relatively. Maybe less comfortable for Turkish Cypriots. But what the previous panel kind of concluded that I think is really valid to this question is that stabilization is not charity and is strategy. And Cyprus is a fertile ground to do stabilization for the region and for Cyprus itself. Cyprus needs to play a bigger role serving stabilization in the region that it's sitting in, because it is safe, because it has come a long way in peace building, in people-to-people contact, in civil society strengthening. I work a lot in Moldova. And when I go to Moldova and see the peace building, where the peace building stage is with Gagauzia, with Transnistria in Moldova, is 20 years behind where Cyprus was. We've got a lot to export in terms of what we learned. We have a lot to pollinate. And I think we have not fully capitalized on that knowledge, on that experience, and how far we've come. Because we also fall into this despondent trap that nothing is changing or everything is still the same. Maybe at the outcome level that we have not signed an agreement, but a lot has changed. And I grew up in a Cyprus where we couldn't cross. I grew up in a Cyprus where I couldn't travel outside. And in terms of people-to-people contact, civil society, in terms of how our perceptions of each other and of identities and what it means to do peace building has changed a lot. So I think if we consider stabilization a strategy, then Cyprus should be very central to that, because it's not only for Cyprus, but it's what Cyprus can do and deliver for others too.
You know, that's such a good point, because we rarely hear about conflict zones offering things to other people. It's always presented as the drag and the burden on everybody else. That's a very, very good point to have raised. How much do you see the job of the diaspora then being about encouraging and fostering a peaceful resolution at this civic level versus trying to drive what you were talking about there, Christos, a government? And in the event that it is a government, is it the British or is it someone else that ends up trying to resolve this?
So the diaspora, I mean, we are very fortunate here in the UK that actually we do have a very vibrant Cypriot, and I mean Greek and Turkish and Maronite and Latino diaspora here in the UK. And therefore we do and can send positive signals back to the island. Only 2 weekends ago, there was a bicommunal festival in North London that was really well attended. It was organised by 9 organisations, Greek and Turkish Cypriot, that sent that positive signal back.
That's impressive in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, we do lots of work with Greek and Turkish Cypriot groups. You know, we published joint statements when the UN envoy was appointed, before the talks in March. So there's a lot that as a Cypriot diaspora we can do to reinforce that actually there is a common view here, grassroots, across Greek and Turkish Cypriots, that we do want to see a reunited island, right? We don't subscribe some of the narrative that's being pushed by Mr. Tatar and others around partition. We want to see the island reunited. So as a Cypriot diaspora here in the UK, that's what we're kind of living, breathing and messaging. In addition to obviously making requests of our government. And the reason why obviously I emphasise the UK government is because I'm a British taxpayer, British citizen. That's my government. Right? It's not the government of Cyprus. Obviously, we represent our diaspora to them, but I vote and live here. And so that's why my reference comes to that.
Understood. Christos?
I think sometimes the way we build habits and behaviors of discussing problems becomes the issue in itself. And I think oftentimes, you know, discussing the conflict becomes the matter and not the conflict itself. You know, or whatever has to be resolved. And that's why I started off my introduction earlier by speaking about cultural politics and identity, because I think Cyprus is now at a stage, you know, as a young country. It's only been founded, let's say, as a state in 1960, so it's only been 65 years. So, you know, it's in a process of evolution. And when it comes to discussing what Cyprus projects as a state for the future, for the 21st, 22nd century, I think it's very important to begin to speculate new forms of organization.
What is the image in your mind that you see?
You know, the image is not just for Cyprus. I think the whole world. You cannot isolate one part of the world anymore and begin to build images. We live in a big mosaic of situations, of conditions, and I think, if anything, the shift of the conversation, or the phenomenal shift of the conversation from globalization to regionalization, is a little bit perverse in itself, because globalization would have never happened without, first of all, regionalization. That has always been the conversation, and nobody ever thought that we would suddenly go from small sort of agricultural communities to a big planetary sort of governance system. Yeah, that would be foolish for anybody to think. So we're in the process of negotiating all of those things. And I think when it comes to the matter of Cyprus, that negotiation is also quite pertinent because it becomes a pressure cooker of experiments, all these conversations of what a potential future could be, not only for Cyprus, but generally for the region and most probably also for the world, because the conditions of, let's say, conflict, I use the term very loosely, are so interesting, mathematically, politically, culturally, etc., it becomes almost like a kind of an unsolvable problem which needs an elevation to a next level, to a higher level, to be able to see it and resolve it properly, you know.
Bambas, at your level, when you're dealing and raising Cyprus, is it an intractable conflict? Is it the frozen, comfortable conflict? Is it something you see that has the opportunity to progress within, say, a first term of a Labor government? And is it something that you even see Britain leading here, using trade deals with Turkey as potential leverage? Or do you think Britain can't do this alone? It would need a third partner or even a couple of partners?
I definitely think progress can be made. And part of the desire is to make sure that people are talking. The most dangerous time is when people are not talking and nothing's happening. So the fact there are things going on, there are trade deals to be made, there are lots of moving parts, I think that really does help. Whether the UK can do it on its own or with the support of others, I think it will be with the support of others, because I think it's too much for just one nation to be able to do. So I think there is a phrase, I can handle the despair, but it's the hope that kills you. And there have been many false dawns before, but I really do think that this time we are in a position where real progress can be made, almost unexpectedly, and that progress is being very much supported by the UK government. And
who do you see as the most likely sort of partner? EU? The US seems very distracted by other conflicts at the moment.
I think the EU have a key role to play. I think also other partners in the region as well. Obviously, the Cyprus is in a very strategic role, but what Cyprus has been very good at doing is making connections with other partners, whether that's with Egypt or with Israel or with Jordan or Lebanon or with other countries. So it does have that strategic role that it can play as being like like an oasis in the storm, perhaps, like something, or an oasis in the desert. So I think it's like that sort of, people can come to Cyprus, they feel safe there, they're able to, Cyprus has a good reputation, so I think engaging with those other countries could be absolutely key. Again, it's not just about trade deals, there are other discussions that can take place, but trade is obviously one of the factors. So I'm quietly hopeful and optimistic, but we have to take this step by step.
Yeah, I think I wanted to come here because also Cyprus has come very, very close to finding a solution, right? It's not that intractable. A lot of the chapters have been resolved. The negotiators themselves have agreed and said publicly that they're 98% there. There's only 2% left to go. So overall in the global politics, in terms of how close we are to solving different conflicts, we're so close. So it can be a good, quick, low-hanging fruit success story for the region, but for the actors, whether it's the EU or the UK. I think what matters, so it's not worth asking the questions of what do we do about property or security. I think those issues have been resolved. What matters is taking the leap of faith. So that's what we've got left to do, is to take the leap of faith. And that matters for process and timing. Because for me, it's really important to time it right, with the right process, because the cost of failure is huge, right?
And can I just one thing, it's also about getting the right people at the right time, in the right place. And I think in the past, you haven't always had the right people at the right time. And I think now, we are getting closer to that position.
You think the current set of leaders are more ready than before?
It's the leap of faith issues. I think so. It's being willing to take that leap of faith. So I think hopefully we're getting there.
One institution nobody ever seems to raise these days is the Commonwealth. Is there any role that the Commonwealth could play for Cyprus here, or is this So is that institution now just so far out of the game in terms of being a player of any sort? I don't know who wants to take that. Bambos?
Yeah, so I...
You've got the mic.
So in Westminster there's something called the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. So I'm on the executive of the CPA, and Cyprus has played a key role with the CPA as well in the past, and it does create opportunities where you can link with other Commonwealth countries and discuss various issues that affect you all, or you have like a common interest about the relationship with the UK. So I think the Commonwealth does have a key role to play, and I think the UK's role with the Commonwealth is also key, because there was a fear that that would be somehow watered down after the Queen passed away. So I think with Prince Charles, or King Charles as he now is, sorry, Freudian slip there, but with King Charles, I think he's very passionate about keeping the Commonwealth alive and about having a new impetus, new energy. So I think Cyprus has a big role to play in that, and I think that could also reap benefits long term.
Christos, I can see you champing at the bit here.
Just to say really quickly that, kind of going back to the point about Brexit and kind of the post-Brexit world, there could have been a scenario where the UK embraced the Commonwealth more, and that might have had a more dynamic role in this kind of thing. But it looks like actually that isn't the reality, and it has fallen back to kind of the big players, the EU, the US, the UK, to kind of shape these discussions.
And do you think that Brexit makes that dynamic more of a problem, or there are some actual silver linings there for Cyprus?
I think it is. I think it's kind of given the UK a bit more freedom to kind of engage with the EU more positively, engage with Turkey on some of these opportunities that it has now. So there are more doors open and tools available diplomatically for the UK, I think, in this world than there might have been previously.
Very interesting. We are going to open for some questions soon, so if anyone does have any questions for our panellists, please do make yourself known. In fact, I can see a question here. We may as well, because we've only got about 10 minutes left, given your extended Cypriot coffee break timing. This woman here in the pink jacket. Thank you.
Question for Bambos. Oh, sorry. Got quite a loud voice anyway. For Bambos, I was thinking, because as we were talking about Brexit, about the loss of MEPs, and how has that gap been plugged? I mean, I know the EP has an office here in London, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe committees, or how do we get through to this level of making knowledge about the Cyprus and various issues, because obviously this was a very active forum prior to Brexit.
I mean, there is the Council of Europe still, so I think that's also an opportunity to raise issues in the Council of Europe. But there are also other opportunities as well. So I think having MEPs, whilst it's a huge loss, I think we'll just have to accept that. But it's also about making connections with the other countries, whether it's bilateral or whether it's via other ways. And that's not always down to parliamentarians, but but the UK can also bring people together. But I think on the elected front, on elected representatives, the MEP situation just has gone, and we're desperately trying to rebuild those connections with our European partners. Yesterday I was in Dublin. I was on with the procedure committee. We were doing an inquiry into independent members of Parliament, but they were very keen to welcome us to the Dáil, and so we made a very good impression when we went there. So I think more visits like that make a good impression for the UK.
I mean, have either of you two in your organisations seen or filled any gaps here, but since Brexit, of needing to formalise cross-channel connections that used to just naturally exist, or has this been able to continue on?
I mean, in reality, at an organisational level, not really. I mean, we obviously have sister organisations in different countries. Likewise, we have sister organisations in France and other countries in Europe that we work with to kind of coordinate a message. But you just have to adapt to the new reality of post-Brexit, right? So that's what we're working with.
And you found it organically, just continuing on those relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and if anything, it's meant that, probably much to Bambos and his parliamentary colleagues' annoyance, we've doubled down on parliamentary engagement. So hey, every cloud has a silver lining.
More targets on your back, Bambos. Do we have any other questions in the room? Yes, this gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, going back to the Cyprus problem, there seems to be a misalignment on perceptions about the Cyprus problem, which is obviously we're in democracy. But where do these misalignments align? Is that there's a stigma of distrust in government institutions, and this is evident in the European elections that were quite recent in Cyprus. So my question for the panel is, how is this perceived by Cypriots of the diaspora? And going back to the discussion on engaging in conversations, what kind of conversations are we talking about? Is it more on a political landscape, or is it engaging with the public and actually listen to what they have to say?
I mean, this is a great question, I think, for you, Christos.
Yes, I think, so obviously we've talked about kind of political will and the role of leadership there, and I think that's kind of the most important factor. So, and I don't think that's something that can really be solved through the diaspora, apart from through that pressure on the British government to play a more positive and active role. But in terms of kind of the experience of the diaspora, I think there is something there that can be learned in Cyprus. So I mentioned that I grew up in a kind of highly concentrated community of Cypriots in North London. And what you find there is that in my school there were Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and it wasn't a major issue at all. There weren't tensions. There were the same friendship groups. You'd play football together. You'd kind of socialise, and it showed that there is a clear community, and we're talking about Bambos' constituency very much here, where you don't have those people-to-people issues, and you see that the value of kind of the day-to-day interactions. And the question is kind of what makes that successful in London? Is it about trust in institutions to kind of resolve any differences that people would have? Is it just the general kind of feeling of multiculturalism that, we don't stand out as being different to each other in a city that has people from thousands of different cultural backgrounds and mixed backgrounds? So I think there's something there in Cyprus to kind of learn about the importance of those interactions and trust and kind of building up the relationships between people and organisations.
Ilka, I think this is a good question for you too, because there's this distinction between, are we pressuring politicians or is it at the civic level? And you do a lot of work at the civic level.
Yeah, I think it's several things I wanted to kind of maybe separate out on the civic level. One, yes, we do need more dialogue. And that dialogue and contact theory works, right? We know contact theory works everywhere in the world. The European Union is a good example of this. But dialogue needs to be structured and focused. Otherwise, people feel their times are being wasted, they don't get the feedback, or they get more fatigue than apathy. But for contact theory and dialogue to work, we need structure, but we need consistency, frequency, and meaning. Right? If the consistency of dialogue is on and off, and if the meaning is, there's no structure and meaning to it, and no feedback loops, and it's not frequent enough, it stays exception to the rule. And exceptions to the rule do not help us progress. So I think when we think about dialogue, we need to think about mechanisms for that dialogue. It's not about putting people in a room to get them talk about something and then go home in their busy days. Are we talking about question time that UK does really well? Are we talking about civic assemblies? What kind of structured mechanisms can we build for meaningful
or even
dialogue?
cultural points,
yes,
which I think can be some of the most powerful. The Olympics is a good example, right?
Absolutely, and I think this is what you were saying, Christos, at the start, right? We've got wider networks now, in Cyprus and outside of Cyprus, and wider occupational networks. I think we sometimes fall into this repetition habit of doing peace building literally. And we do peace building by talking about peace. I don't think that's how we need to do peace building, by talking about peace. We can do peace building occupationally. I think one of the best peace building efforts in Cyprus that succeeded meaningfully were the tattoo artists and the jazz musicians. And I think occupations bring commonalities and common denominators without politicizing, which has become a tainted word, and then many people shy from it when we politicize peace like that. Thank you.
That was a great comment.
If I may, I would like to go back to the question that the gentleman asked and follow up on what you're saying on the communication and the contact. I don't know if it's about formalized dialogue or whether it's about organic dialogue. I have a lot of Turkish Cypriot friends. I worked with some of them, Safet Bekiroglu and others, who live now and work in Nicosia. And I think getting to know people on a personal level absolutely eliminates a lot of the posturing and the conversation formalisms that get embedded with institutional talk. And I think, where does that happen? Civic talk, of course, is a very important place or format. I think, our project in Nicosia, Lefteria Square, was a project that was predominantly for getting space, public space, for people to be able to go in and to engage. And it's not just community differences that we have to bridge, it's also differences within ourselves that we have to bridge to be able to get a better awareness and a better understanding of what we are. So public space is very important, building parks, building the spaces where people go there with unfettered interest to be able to discuss and converse and get to know each other. So bottom-up politics, very important in this case, and I think the diaspora can help in that because it has first-hand experience in doing this in the UK very, very successfully, but also on the island and in social media and elsewhere to build places where people can actually meet and talk on a humane level. So the future is about sustainability. You asked me before, I failed to answer it successfully. It's about greenness, it's about inclusivity, most importantly about justice and personal integrity, and I think if we can get those things right, I think we have a lot to say for ourselves.
Okay, well, we have to wrap up, unfortunately. We've run out of time. So if you could all please thank our wonderful panelists for that great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And please don't go anywhere. You're all moving to your next session immediately. So no extended coffee break this time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for another great discussion. Our final discussion for today is titled Recalibrating UK-EU Relations in a Shifting World. As the UK and the EU redefine the relationship post-Brexit, Cyprus, as the incoming presidency of the Council and a committed EU member with long-standing ties to the UK, looks forward to a future of cooperation, strength, and enduring partnership. Let me welcome our panelists. Pedro Serrano, European Union Ambassador to the UK. Anna Koukidis Prokopiou, President of the Politia think tank. Anastasia Dimiski, Research Officer at the Hellenic Observatory at LSE. And Konstantin Kodzias, European Director of Bloomberg. And moderating this important discussion will be Professor Ian Beck from the London School of Economics. Welcome. Yes, thank you. Please have a seat here.
Okay, then first thing for me to say is Kalispera, everybody. I look forward to an interesting discussion. We have very distinguished speakers. Sadly, the Ambassador Serrano has to leave early because he has the misfortune of having a European Commissioner in town and he needs to look after him. Well, maybe misfortune is an exaggeration. So who do we have here? Well, we have Pedro Serrano, the EU Ambassador to London. We have Anna Koukidis Prokopiou, nearly pronounced correctly, from Politea. Anastasia Dimiski from the same place as me, Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics, and Konstantin Kotsias from Bloomberg. I hope I've given you the right introductions. I'm not going to go into bibliographies or anything else. Don't have time for that. Our topic, according to the programme, is recalibrating EU-UK relations in a shifting world. I've rewritten it as an EU-UK reset with the subtitle Substantial, Limited or Overstated. So that's my initial provocation, just to make you think about all of this. 4 observations to begin. The first is that I would say that over the last 2 or 3 years we've seen a definite improvement in tone in the relations. It started with the Sunak government, and I guess some of you recall something called the Windsor Framework, which was a success of that government, at least in diminishing the Northern Ireland problem. I think it's been accentuated since the Labour administration came to power. But sometimes the perception here is that there's still obstructiveness from certain EU partners, possibly not least the Élysée Palace, with France, as always, being seen as the obstacle to making change. Second major area I would call the security and defence nexus. We have obvious common concerns, but there is the specific UK issue of dealing with the small boats, where underlying a lot of the approach that the UK has made towards le continent is how can we get help in stopping the small boats. Second big area, market access. There's different ways in which market access is in the process of changing. The first, as an economist, I would say, is recognition on both sides that it's lose-lose. If you obstruct market access, both sides lose, and that's one of the legacies of Brexit. But they lose from non-tariff barriers. We're all embroiled in thinking about tariffs since a new resident moved into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But at the same time, the EU's concern seems to me to be cherry-picking. The UK wants to do certain things. The EU says, well, yes, that is cherry-picking, or in Boris Johnson's terms, having your cake and eating it. And the third area I think is worth discussing is free movement. Scope for a deal. The EU wants a youth mobility scheme. The UK would like, and certainly I would very much like, an end to these ridiculous passport checks where my new blue passport is nearly full after just 4 years because I have to be stamped every time in and out of Schengen. I've ended up negotiating with passport officers. Can you get more on a page? So I'm hoping that the ambassador will give us some good news about that happening sooner rather than October. So I'll finish with just four short overarching questions. In your area of interest, this is to the panelists, is this week's real deal real progress, or is it much too vague? Second, what would you propose to take recalibration, if that's our word of the day, further? Is the drift we see both here and on the continent towards populism something that's going further to damage EU-UK relations? And very open question, what happens next? And are you optimistic or pessimistic on this not so sunny afternoon? So, Ambassador, I know you have to escape, so I'll give you the floor first. I'm holding my panelists to 5 to 6 minutes each. In contrast, I understand, to the first panel, who overshot.
Well, thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here in the Cypriot High Commission and to be discussing this in a very timely, at a very timely moment. And you said you gave us a few choices of how we describe what happened on Monday. I would definitely say it's substantial and a game changer. It is really a new chapter. Our leaders, both Prime Minister of the UK and President Costa and von der Leyen, referred to this as a new era in the relationship. And I will explain a bit what that means in practical terms and address some of the things you said. But it starts actually by acknowledging that circumstances have changed substantially in the last years. And if anything, Europe has to come closer together for its prosperity, for its security, for the defense of its values and democracy. And Europe coming closer together, bearing in mind that the European Union is a big bloc in constituting that Europe, that in addition to 27 member states, you have 10 that are candidate countries. and you have 10 other, or at least 9 others that are very closely associated, then it's about strengthening the relationship with the UK. And the UK is not any member, it's one of the key states in the international community, permanent member of the Security Council, G7, an important military capacity, industrial capacity, know-how, universities, everything. So having a strong relationship with the United Kingdom is important for the security, for the prosperity of Europe, and for the UK. Being within Europe is vital. UK is part of the ecosystem of resilience of Europe's system of resilience, built mostly around the European Union, and most of its trade is with the European Union. 47% of the trade, goods and services of the UK are with the EU, 16-17 with the US, 6-7 with China, and it goes down. So
1 with India.
You said it. So the importance of trade with the and therefore reducing, eliminating hurdles, non-tariff barriers, as we're saying, Ian, very important in order, and will have a direct consequence for the EU. So part of what has been agreed is a vision for the relationship that takes into account the change of circumstances, a roadmap for the implementation of that vision, which needs to unfold in the chapters of security, defense, prosperity, and there are quite a few chapters within prosperity, people-to-people contact, and so important areas, and then finally a finalized agreement on creating a secure defense partnership. On the narrative side and vision side, this has been declared a strategic relationship. On concrete issues, apart from the SDP, which has concrete elements in terms of the not only enhanced cooperation between Foreign Office and the External Action Service, and regular meetings between Foreign Secretary and High Representative, and all the different elements within their departments. There's also the opening of crisis management missions and operations participation to the UK. And what is, I think, of greater interest and relevance at this stage is the possibility for the UK to participate more fully in some of the financial instruments that the European Union is deploying, not least the SAFE, Security Action for Europe, it's called, which is a credit facility of up to 150 billion euros for joint procurement and defense. With the Secure Defense Partnership, the UK can already participate in joint procurement. By the way, the SAFE regulation was adopted yesterday, so all this is going quite speedily. But it also opens the door for additional and UK companies based in Europe can participate in those projects. It remains to have another agreement that you could not enter into if you did not have a secure defense partnership that will open also further participation to UK companies within the UK. So I think that's a very substantial element. But there are more substantial elements. And by the way, if we hadn't looked at all this in its as a group of actions that we want to undertake, it would have been practically impossible, in my view, one action or in one sector, one agreement after another to advance. We needed that common vision to make progress. On economic side, we have agreed to, and this was a major point for the UK, an SPS agreement. If you take into account a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement for the export and import of agri-food, 60% of UK's exports in agri-food go to the EU. We have an agreement, and this will eliminate certificates, basically red tape, which means that products will be able to transit freely between the UK and the European Union. We have agreed on fisheries. Again here, and I see the press how it portrays it in, I would say, not a very fair way. This is reciprocal access to waters, so British fishermen and women can fish in EU waters and vice versa. EU fishermen and women can fish in UK waters, but it also guarantees the openness of the EU market to UK fisheries. And if you take into account that 70% of what is caught is sold in the European Union, I think, and that we have rather a turbulent trade international environment, having the guarantee that that market is open for British fish for the next 12 years, it's not a meager thing. There are more things. Energy, and this is a very important one as well, the openness to the UK of the electricity market of the European Union. The UK has a lot of potential in renewables. Having the possibility to join that European market will be a great incentive for investment and will help also lower prices, increase energy security, both in the UK and the EU. So again, a win-win situation. And of course, in terms of economy, I should have mentioned, I should have added that defense industry is going to be a great source of investment, job creation also in the next years. And again, so not only from the defense angle, but also from the economic angle, it makes a lot of sense. Security, migration, I think you referred to that as well. Enhanced cooperation on migration in many different aspects, but I know I'm running out of time, so I will not go. And I did want to mention before you cut me off, the people-to-people contact. This is seen as an EU ask. I think, again, wrong. Everywhere I go to in the UK, I get not only groups of young people, universities as well, saying, are we going to rejoin Erasmus and wanting to rejoin Erasmus? And young people and groups and civil society organizations saying, we would like to travel to the EU. And it's just for traveling, studying, working, whatever. And it has been agreed that we will be considering a scheme to allow that. You asked about e-gates, and here again, there are no legal obstacles for having transit through e-gates, but it will take more importance after the introduction of the and by the way, e-gates exist in some countries already for the access of UK visitors into Europe. Passports have to be stamped though, and this we're going to get rid of. Once the entry-exit system enters into force, it would be entered gradually to create less distortion and suffering to all as possible. But once you've registered in the EES, you will be able to access through e-gates, and you will not have to have your passport stamped, and hopefully we will recover a better flow. We are also looking at how the UK is implementing his ETA, by the way, and to ensure that passengers or visitors from the EU can come easily to the UK, as we want UK visitors to continue coming easily and feel welcome when they do come to Europe. So I think all in all, a very ambitious program, but we have to implement it. We have to roll out additional agreements in some cases, but a new vision to the relationship, a new narrative for the relationship, a great step taken on Monday. Thank you.
Oh, deeply positive, I think. Right, Ambassador, I'm looking precisely. Do you have to leave it precisely 1:30?
I could make 1:35.
Right, in that case, I'm going to propose that we take the three remaining speakers, who will all be very strict on their time, leaving a couple of minutes for the Ambassador to answer the first questions from the floor. Is that acceptable? Anna.
3 LSE people on this panel, so another conspiracy brewing. So let me start by an anecdote which came to mind when I was reading what the press has been saying about the agreement on Monday. First day, I was taking a foreign policy analysis class with Margot Light, which I'm sure you know. And what do we see? Sir Humphrey, giving us foreign policy lessons through, yes, Minister. And of course, that day the dictum was politics will help you survive till Friday afternoon, foreign policy will help you survive till the next century. And I would say foreign policy can't really happen unless you've got security in the mix, and this is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm all for the agreement. I do share what has been said, as it's definitely a positive outcome, and the bad blood, it was almost swept from the corridors of power, the bad blood between the UK and the EU. So it's a start. It's a new narrative by all means. But I don't really see the big picture being discussed. I don't really see the vision as far as security is concerned being on the table. I don't really see the strategy. What I've heard about in these past few days is about jobs, about procurement, and that's absolutely correct and absolutely, on the positive side, don't get me wrong. But do we really see what's coming up for us that will lead to the next century? How can you have peace? How can you have prosperity? How can you have jobs if you don't have security? And what are we currently being faced with? The international order, a norms-based international order, is coming undone as we speak. Democracy is at threat. Are we planning to do something about it? And has the EU and the UK, have they realized that, looking across the Atlantic doesn't do the trick anymore? Because the very creators of the international order after the in the post-World War II period, the Americans, I would dare say the first modern democracy of our times, despite what the Brits say about their own system of government, the Americans, don't seem to be very fond of democracy anymore. So if we talk about values, and I do still speak about values, even though it's not that fashionable anymore, if we speak about values, where is the alignment? I mean, the EU as an institution, okay, there are individual member states who may not really agree with all the European values we come to share. But if we talk about values, the alignment at this point in time is between the EU and the UK. And when we talk about security, we really need to understand, we need to perceive security in terms of an inclusive security doctrine. So you cannot separate internal security from external security anymore. So when you talk about a multiplier of security internally, you can talk about endogenous resilience, for example. And to have endogenous resilience against shocks as a society, you really need to have social cohesion. A big threat to social cohesion has been irregular migration. It has racism, xenophobia. And where does that stem from? It stems from climate change, which pushes migratory flows. It stems from people smuggling and trafficking and organized crime, which act as transactional actors. So it takes a network to fight a network. And I haven't seen at all in the discussions about the future, the unfolding future relationship between the EU and the UK, this kind of discussion about security in that term, that the UK cannot be safe, cannot be secure, unless it makes, unless there is a solid foundation to its relations with the EU, and the same is reciprocal. So this discussion has been missing, I think, from the narrative. It is something that personally worries me. And in my mind, things can only get worse before and if they get any better. So when we talk about an EU and UK deal, is all good, all the things that are on the table. Keir Starmer talked about a reset, and I do think there is a reset going on. But what has been discussed is not enough, because the vision is not there, the strategy is not there.
I think you, in terms of my questions, you were saying overstated. Anastasia.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists and distinguished guests, it is an honor to speak today on the recalibration of EU and UK relations in a shifting world. As we navigate the complexities of post-Brexit diplomacy era, there is a need to recognize that our future depends not only on trade agreements and security pacts, but also on the movement of talent, the empowerment of youth, and the financial literacy that supports economic resilience. By embracing strategic policies in these areas, we can build a stronger and a more interconnected world. One of the defining challenges of our time is the movement of skilled professionals. The phenomenon of brain drain, where talented individuals leave their home countries for better opportunities abroad, has long been a concern for nations striving to retain their brightest minds. However, the reverse, brain gain, presents an opportunity to attract talent back home, fostering innovation and economic growth. Cyprus, for example, is actively reversing brain drain through its brain gain initiative, offering tax incentives and career opportunities to skilled professionals abroad. At the same time, the country is strengthening youth mobility by proactively reconnecting with its diaspora. President Nikos Christodoulidis has been engaging Cypriots in London, introducing incentives that encourage their return and contribution to the island's growing economy. The UK, too, must consider how it can balance the loss of EU talent with policies that encourage skilled migration. The EU's proposed Youth Mobility Scheme is a step in this direction, allowing young professionals to work and study across borders. While concerns about immigration persist, a structured, reciprocal program could provide economic benefits without compromising national policies. Closely linked to talent exchange is youth mobility, a powerful tool for fostering cross-border collaboration. The EU and UK are currently negotiating a 12-month youth experience visa, which could pave the way for thousands of young Europeans to live and work in the UK. This initiative is not about reinstating free movement, but rather about fostering cultural exchange and professional development. The UK already has similar agreements with non-EU nations, and expanding this framework to EU member states could strengthen diplomatic ties while addressing labour shortages in key industries. Beyond talent migration and youth mobility, financial literacy remains a fundamental pillar of economic resilience. Without a financially informed public, even the most well-intended monetary policies risk falling short. The European Central Bank has emphasized that financial literacy is essential for price stability and inflation expectations. Cyprus has demonstrated leadership in this area through its Financial Literacy and Education Commission. However, financial education must extend beyond basic knowledge. It should address financial exclusion, equip individuals with smart investment strategies, and safeguard them against misinformation, particularly the growing influence of social media-driven financial trends. In Europe and the UK, young people are increasingly drawn to high-risk investments and get-rich-quick schemes. Reports by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority indicate that younger investors are more likely to engage in speculative investments driven by factors such as competition, novelty, and fear of missing out. The Financial Conduct Authority's Invest Smart campaign has also warned that many treat high-risk financial decisions similarly to gambling, reinforcing the urgent need for stronger consumer protection and financial education initiatives. Crucially, the gender gap in financial literacy remains a persistent challenge. Empowering women with financial education is not only a social imperative, but also an economic necessity that strengthens participation and resilience across all demographics.
Cut to the final line, please.
Yes. So, as we talk about recalibrating UK-EU relations, we must embrace forward-looking policies that encourage talent exchange, empower youth individuals, and strengthen financial literacy. The future of our economies depends on equipping individuals with the skills and opportunities necessary to thrive in an interconnected world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. I'll keep it very brief, and thank you to the introduction to speak here. And I'll make the usual qualifiers that everything I say, particularly on Brexit, which is a highly divisive and polarising issue, are made in a personal capacity and not made in a Bloomberg capacity. So to go back to your sort of threshold questions on the reset deal, substantial, limited, or overstated, and I say this really as a sort of business person, I'd say all three. And I'd say I would agree with a lot of what I've heard in terms of substantial in terms of vision and narrative and a platform to move forward. But if you really unpack the specificity of the line items that were agreed, I think it's limited. And I think in many ways, from this side of the channel, it had to be. I think if you look back at that Brexit negotiation originally and then the Brexit debate leading into the vote, people have short memories. It was highly emotive, highly divisive. And so I think it's a credit, actually, to the current, it's not a political statement, to the current administration to lay out what are, and I agree with what was said earlier on, tactical steps which could lead over the longer term to a more overarching strategic result. But so if you just, and again, very briefly, if you look at the trade and economic output, it's modest. If you look at the youth mobility things, it's tactical, but again, welcome. If you go down defence and security, travel and border facilitation, I would say the same. On fishing and some of those other issues, I think what's important again is the signalling. Compromises were made. And so to the earlier panel, building trust and creating a platform, I think, is almost more important than the specificity of what was agreed this time round. So I think good progress, substantial in terms of the path it sets. I think limited and in some instances overstated, but I think that was the nature of the beast. And I think to your final point, are we optimistic about the future, or do we think populism and some of the narratives that we've been hearing in the press? I do worry about that. I do think we're again hearing those voices that this is a sellout, this is a betrayal. And if you look at, Germany was mentioned earlier on, France, if you look at some of the populist centre, populist right and populist left, both here and abroad, I think this could continue to be a fertile area for that narrative. So I think actually, overall, both in terms of the substance and in terms of the signal, I think a really solid start with real constraints. And I am actually hopeful that over the longer term, despite all the turbulence around, there's a platform for future success.
Thanks very much, Konstantin. As promised, therefore, we have 2 or 3 minutes to throw questions at the ambassador before he has to leave. So in this case, I'm going to open it immediately to anybody in the audience who wants to pose a question to him.
Is this me? Yes. Yes, Ian, thank you. John Peter, The Economist. The real point, which I think you've all touched on, is that the constraints on this negotiation are set by the UK's red lines. And I guess my question for the ambassador really is, when you look to the future, do you think there is any chance of a softening of those red lines, and possibly also of the EU's own red line, which says you cannot have full access to the single market unless you accept all 4 freedoms? We know Northern Ireland has access to the single market without accepting the 4 freedoms. So, you could be flexible that way around as well.
Go ahead. and answer that one. And then anybody else who has a quick question for the ambassador, think of it quickly.
You know, I cannot really respond to you, John. I think this, and I think you phrased it, I would say I subscribe to what you say absolutely, but you phrase it very nicely, and it is a first step. It is important. It is taking into account certain constraints, but I do think it is still very substantial, and it will, it's not easy to implement because the agreements that we have to enter into will require complicated negotiations and delicate negotiations. I do think that there is the willingness to do it on both sides. Again, the way it will be welcomed in the press and some media particularly will probably be complicated as well. But I do think it takes us forward very substantially from where we were. And it does achieve one of the goals that the Labour government had given itself to conduct a reset while respecting the red lines it had set. And therefore it is going to, so I think I understand, you know, we can always say something ambitious enough or not ambitious enough, and there are many people in this country who would want a more ambitious relationship with the EU. At the same time, there are clearly people in the country which view the ambition with care. So I think all this has been taken into account. What will happen in the future? Who knows? It is an important step, and I hope it will take us further.
Any other question for the ambassador? In that case, I'm going to pose one. I said, are you pessimistic or optimistic? You've been sounding optimistic, but how do you justify that optimism?
Well, I think, you know, if you would have asked me a few months ago whether we would have such an ambitious set of agreements, and many of them agreements to agree last Monday, I would not have been sure that we would be having this, because it required also political courage to take it forward, and political courage was there, and vision in what needs to be. I think there is a vision that is clearly stated in the joint statement, that deals very much with the items that you have been raising. I do agree with you that this vision is not part of the public discourse. And so the step that has to be taken, I think, more clearly is bringing this vision into the public discourse. But the vision is there, and therefore it really has a potential for further development, and that's what gives me optimism. I also look at the reality of international life and what surrounds us. I do not see many alternatives to a stronger relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And very often the relationship is portrayed in zero-sum game terms. I think this is a huge mistake. This is win-win. What we have achieved on Monday is a win-win. I even for issues that say this is what they want, this is what we want, I think it's what we want all along. And each and every one of the items that figure in that agreement, it will benefit citizens in the United Kingdom, will benefit citizens in the European Union. At the end, our job is to benefit and to make lives of citizens better, and I think this is a step in that direction. That's why I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Well, that sounds like a very optimistic reason, and time to let you go.
Thank you very much. Pleasure, and apologies for having to leave. Thank you so much.
Right, we can now continue. I hope you'll accept that I first ask a couple of questions, and then we come back to the audience for the remainder of the session. The first one I'd like to pose, I put down in terms of two words: likely roadblocks. We've heard about a very ambitious agenda. We know various things that may or may not be realized. Maybe this time I'll start with you, Konstantin. What would you see as the most dangerous roadblocks to, if we can use the word progress towards achieving the goals that have been articulated?
I think the politics. the politics, not just here, but also across the European Union. It is being absolutely used, as we've seen it already, and it's only a few days out, as a vehicle around which certain groups will align. So I think populist, left or right, anti-European sentiment in terms of further integration, wherever that may come from, and there's certain member states, and there are certain constituencies here. So I think the politics is unpredictable. And then I think, to the ambassador's point, I think it's implementation. I think there are some really good contours that have been laid out, but it will require some work, and it will require a degree of specificity around what the ultimate goal is. And I think if there's a shortfall on delivery, then I think that will feed into one. So I would say politics and implementation.
I'll come to you, Anna, because you mentioned the vision thing. I'm sure you recall what Helmut Schmidt had to say about vision. Anyone who has visions should see an eye doctor. So is the vision thing really a good idea in this, and what are the obstacles to realizing the vision?
Yeah, what I am worried about is that we don't have enough statesmen, stateswomen around. And this is what I refer to when I speak of vision, the big picture. So I think, in my mind, Starmer handled it quite well. I think he's going to survive Friday afternoon. It's already Thursday, and he's still there, even if he sold out the country, as the opposition says, etc., etc. He's done it well. He's been careful not to rattle too many cages, not to cross the red lines. And I'm glad, that the ambassador said there is a vision, unfolding behind closed doors. But we really can't talk about it because it's going to become counterproductive. Because the moment it gets out in the public sphere, they're going to come for the kill. So that's something that I would hold as as an optimistic suspicion as to how things will unfold. But of course, the other roadblock which I would think is going to come up is the division within the EU, and not just particularly about the relations with the UK. The situation is precarious. What does the EU stand for? Is it Macron's EU? Is it Merz who's actually calling the shots regarding the values? What does Meloni have to say, and Orban? And how are things going to unfold within the EU? So that worries me because politics overtakes policy in the world we live in, and that it makes things quite dangerous. So populism is having its field day as we speak, and although this is the beginning of I think a productive relationship, the moment that any twist and turn in the implementation, because the devil is in the detail when you're making the second tier of agreements about implementing everything. Then if someone can use it against you for political reasons, this is what's going to happen, and it can spoil the big picture. So I'm worried about that. And if I can just add one thing, the questions I would have liked to be answered, or at least been addressed by the leadership, and hopefully they're doing it behind closed doors, is who is going to be dealing, for example, with the independence and security of Ukraine post-war? What's going to happen if Putin goes after the Baltics? Will NATO still keep the Americans in and the Russians out? Will we have like a parallel European army structure to NATO when everybody says this is not possible? So I'm just posing some questions out there because this is what worries me. And not only as an analyst, but as a former minister who had to deal with security issues. And of course, I'm speaking in my personal capacity and not representing anyone. But I am worried because we waste a lot of time within the EU framework discussing all these politics and doing these little steps towards which are tactical. And I don't see the big picture being discussed enough.
Okay, thank you. Anastasia, you set out a number of things that you'd like to see happen. What can you see as the obstacles to them?
So, yes, I'm approaching this relationship between EU and UK from an educational perspective. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not in a position to take decisions. But I want to say that it is very important to keep alive this relationship between EU and UK and allow students and professionals to have an opportunity an opportunity to live abroad, and
but that's what the deal promises. What would you see getting in the way of it happening?
Again, I think it's the politics and other issues that have to be solved before giving priority to education, because I'm approaching this relationship from the educational perspective. And I think that governments do not focus that much on the opportunities that young professionals are seeking to have, but put as priority other issues as we discussed.
I think one way of putting it would be the bandwidth isn't big enough for them to cover it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try to move on to a related question, and maybe start with you this time, Anastasia. Yeah. If there's one additional thing you would like to see in a UK-EU deal, what would it be? You've seen what's been set out this week. What's your number one additional priority?
My additional priority is to make young students and professionals believe that there is future.
Yeah, that's ambitious.
Yes, and there are opportunities for them. There are opportunities to make their dreams come true, and there are job opportunities, and also opportunities for them to study abroad, because we know that international students have to pay higher fees compared to domestic students in order to study abroad, and especially in the UK. And I find it a bit unfair, and it's good, you know, to focus more on that.
Okay,
government, yes.
Constantine, again with a microphone.
Keep forgetting to pick it up.
As somebody who's closer to financial markets,
yeah, well, I would
say
financial markets. I do think that could be another next step where, I mean, look, the the UK's unnecessarily now sort of added a significant degree of friction. The European Union has a number of initiatives, without getting too technical, to broaden and deepen their capital markets. And so I think in the short to medium term, revisiting that, it doesn't have the same emotion. It feels technical to both sets of citizens, and you've got a huge capital market here in London, and you've got an aspiration in the European Union to try and improve it. So I do think there could be some technical tweaks there that could deliver some real change and some real growth.
Anna, do you have a number one priority that you throw in?
Yes, I do, yes. On top of discussing defense in terms of procurement, and I'll put it in numbers. We've said, if the UK enters the European defense industry, we're going to have, it's expected 20% increase in output. The question is, why would we need that? So I would suggest that what is missing for the time being, at least from what is being discussed in terms of defense, is an institutionalized process of discussing security arrangements and not just discussing defense procurement.
Good, that's a very ambitious thing as well. I'm not sure there's any organizer in the room to know how much time we have, but until they start blowing a whistle, I will continue.
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, okay. We were supposed to have an hour. We haven't got anywhere near that yet.
You can have 15 minutes.
We'll compromise on 10 at maximum. Let me ask you, Konstantina, a question, because you were castigating others who were saying this is being spread as not a good deal, which is one way of saying fake news, to quote a certain person. Do you think there's a fake news problem in the British media? Bloomberg accepted, of course.
I don't think I was castigating. I think I was just making the observation that people with legitimate views had jumped on it and perhaps exaggerated slightly. But I accept that.
I'd call that castigation.
Look, I mean, the news business now is incredibly fragmented. It's who reads a newspaper, it's online, it's on social media. This is an area where if you go into social media, it's one of those echo chambers, right? And so it is incredibly divisive and not always fact-based. So do we have a fake news problem? I'd say to a degree we do, yes. And I think, and I'm not just sort of making a plug for very reliable fact-based news organisations, but I do think there's a really important role to be played for legitimate, stood-up, fact-based editorial news reporting on both sides, so or whatever side of the debate. So I don't think it's as dramatic as in certain jurisdictions, but it's certainly an area where I think we will see more of it.
At this point, I propose to open to the floor again. Is there anybody who wants to put a question, either in general or to particular panelists? Right, well, we have one here and then one there. So we'll take the two together, if that's all right with you. So starting at the front and then immediately behind. Just tell us who you are and pose the question succinctly.
Will do so. I'm Anna Petridis and I'm here with Oxygen for Democracy, the organizers. And thank you for a great panel. So I want to talk about the US. So
Must you?
Sorry?
Must you?
With apologies, I'm going to jump across the pond and ask, with the new US leadership, how do we see that affecting the EU-UK relationship? We've seen EU leaders and leaders of member states which hold key positions in terms of their influence on the EU, engaging with Keir Starmer on key strategic matters. Where does the US come in all of this? And what does it mean when states such as Canada, which are geographically closer to the US, are aligning with the EU and the UK? What does that mean when it comes to the relationship between the UK and the US? Are there competing priorities?
Great question. Can you pass the microphone right behind you, please?
My name is Andreas Apostolou. I'm a master's student at LSE, Economic History, also research assistant at the Hellenic Observatory. So my question revolves around what has been said by Ms. Prokopiou about vision and the way we do things. So as a historian Syrian, I've been exposed to things like pre-modern dynamics in Europe, but also in post-World II reconstruction, and where this vision came about and reconstructed economies. And it seems how, quoting my professor, Marius Morgan, we underwent into a transition of technocratic economics, where things like advances in technology overcame the way we do economics and the way we do policy. So my question is, do we need less technocracy in the way we do things, in the way we do economics or policy? And a follow-up question is, can we do this and can we become less technocratic and more visionary? That's my question.
And I think maybe you should start with the second one.
Yes, I'll start by saying something which may sound a little bit controversial to some people. The European project, who started it? Who funded it? Who protected it? Wasn't it the Americans? Who paid for Europe to be reconstructed after the Second World War? Marshall Plan, does it ring a bell? So the post-World War order and the European Union, as it has sort of progressed through the years, was to begin with an American project. Now, the Americans have now decided to abandon both projects, according to a very important man, who, whether we like it or not, who happens to be the American president. So, how does that lead to the discussion we're having here? The EU and the UK have more in common now than ever before, because not only do they share geography, not only do they share history, they also share values, and they share a world vision which is similar. That vision is no longer shared by the Americans. The values are no longer shared by the Americans, at least the official administration. So the answer to me is obvious. You need to come together because there's no one else to do this for you. And yes, the tyranny of the technocrats is a phrase which has been used in the literature to describe the experience we have from all the international institutions which sometimes behave in an overarching way and make policy instead of the politicians, making policy. But I do think if you have leadership, you can cut across the lines, the ties of technocracy and do it. It's just a matter of political will. And sometimes the political will doesn't exist or is weak because it's easier to let, an engrenage process to take over and just let things happen. So we shouldn't let things happen. Change should be a conscious decision. And to make conscious decisions, you need leaders who can take those conscious decisions.
Thank you. Anastasia, do you want to answer either question?
Yes, I want to. Of course, I will not approach it from a politics perspective, but from an educational perspective. And we know that President Trump decided to cut budgets from universities in terms of research. And I hope this will not expand to the UK and Europe as well. And I think we need to emphasize in this perspective and empower even more this relationship.
Okay, thank you. Konstantin, if Michael Bloomberg were with us today, I'm sure he did some rather tough things to say about Trump. But there's also a suggestion implicit in the question that the UK is trying to span Europe and the United States. Now, the old-fashioned way of saying this is if you sit on the fence, you get a sore backside. What's your view on this UK dilemma between the one side of the Atlantic and the other side of the English Channel?
You're right about what the boss would say, but again, I'm here in a personal capacity, so I won't go there. I think that it's a great question, and before I just sort of get to that specifically, I think, and I ran a business in the States for a while, and I think it's really important to understand that consensus, that post-war US consensus, that there is a geopolitical priority for US foreign policy, defense and economic in Europe is, if not over, fundamentally disappearing. And if you put that in context, it goes back to, well, why is Trump in the White House? And a lot of my nice East Coast, New York metropolitan friends are still fundamentally punch drunk, right? Because Donald Trump now and the Republican Party, or MAGA Party, is the party of the blue-collar working class in America. And Latinos and African Americans and young men and all those constituencies that used to be a given for the Democrat Party have disappeared and are voting Republican. And this is not, European affairs are not a priority for them. So that populist, simplistic approach, which goes to your technocratic point, is very much in favour. And, you know, subject to what happens in the midterms, I think that's what we're dealing with for some time. To your point on Starmer, I do think there is an opportunity. I mean, I hear what you say about sitting on the fence. I do think there's an opportunity, and I think actually the evidence to date would suggest the government seems to sort of be understanding how to thread that needle. Big displays of history in the White House and signatures from the King play well in the court of Donald Trump, and that's seems to have been reasonably effective, and it's actually had some concrete outcomes in terms of tariffs and discussions, but also the ability to say that maybe the British government can also act as that interlocutor back into Europe where you've lost a bit of interest. So not easy and a challenging strategic question, but I think it, on balance, is an opportunity for Britain.
Great. Well, finishing in an opportunity for Britain sounds to me like quite a good idea. So I do have one last comment to make on Canada, which you mentioned, which is that the 51st state, as somebody would like to rename it, in fact has far closer, not just economic relationships, but is a closer socio-economic model to the European Union than it is to the United States. The welfare state is a phenomenon in Canada which you could recognise from a European lens. So I think that's also important. Also, if you think about it, they're closer to Greenland. So if anybody's going to take over Greenland, why not Canada? So on that note, under the careful eye of the organisers, can I ask you to thank the panellists on my behalf? And I think I saw some lunch being set out outside. Is that correct as well?
So thank you very much for another very interesting and lively panel. And as we conclude today's forum, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to all our speakers, moderators, and audience members, both in person and online. Your voices, ideas, and patience made this event not just meaningful, but hopefully impactful. Special thanks goes to our partners and supporters. And most importantly, I would like to thank the High Commissioner, Mr. Kouros, and of course, Melivia Dimitriou, for the excellent collaboration we've had for the second year in a row. The Cyprus Forum London continues to demonstrate the value of transnational dialogue, diaspora engagement, and strategic partnership. And we look forward to building on today's discussions and working with all of you to shape a better future for Cyprus, the UK, and beyond. We hope to see you again next year, and please enjoy the lunch outside. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.